Hello everybody, my name is Paul, and welcome to the Stormkeep. We are talking about how to counter Nighthaunt, and today I'm joined by...
Oh, hey, it's Daniel here.
Hey, it's Morgan.
And Jack.
And today we're joined by a special guest, Alex. He is our resident expert Nighthaunt player. Alex, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I am happy to be on here and talk about Ghosty Boys and how to beat them.
So what are your qualifications? Why should anyone care what you think about Nighthaunt?
I'm relatively bad at the game, I will say. That being said, I pretty much main death, minus Feck plus Corn. So a lot of Nighthaunt under my belt, quite a few, a lot of podiums, I think I've got one GT win with Nighthaunt, but dozens of podiums basically with them. I play a lot of death armies. I've seen the changes and how the dynamics of the rules have either been parallel or started to create their own kind of method or theme within the within the battle tomes. And just got a lot of experience playing Nighthaunt.
Great. I would have accepted I own Nighthaunt models. That's good enough for me, frankly.
Or, being a higher ranking ITC player, Mr. Alex.
Well, we're glad to have you here because on this series, How to Counter Everything, it's an ongoing series on the Stormkeep. We look at powerful factions and lists in the tournament scene, and we look at what makes them strong, what their limitations are, how they approach battles, and then we discuss how to counter them, short and sweet. And I think this is useful for every army, not just for Stormcast. Even though we are the Stormkeep, we love to talk about Stormcast. I think we try to have as much general information here as possible before we get into specific Stormcast strategies and units to use. So we'll look at tactics and strategies that Nighthaunt are going to try to employ, how people can counter them, how to set up their units, what kinds of units they ought to be picking, and then we'll get into specific examples of Stormcast units that we think are really good. So I've got a short list here of Nighthaunt kind of as a faction identity. And let me know, Alex, if anything here sounds wrong. But let's go through this list. So first up, they're a relatively slow army, right? Everything moves 8 inches, which seems pretty fast on paper because a lot of armies move 4 to 6, something like that for their standard infantry. But as an 8-inch move army, where they make up for that is that everything flies and everything can retreat and charge, which gives them phenomenal mobility. But in terms of their ability to just clear the board round one, get to the other side in case somebody's got like a super far deployment, there's better armies for that, right? Like Ironjawz are really fast compared to Nighthaunt. Does that sound about right?
Yes and no. I think that for me, it's the question of how fast. Like, is 8 inches considered slow or is it considered fast? It depends on the army. Especially when it comes to everything being minimum 8-inch charge. I'm sorry, 8-inch move. I actually personally think that, especially in turn one, since I don't really want to be in my opponent's face all the time, being able to like move 8 inches plus potentially a run, there's usually nothing too wrong with that. In addition to that, at least in my own personal list, I always run at least 1 or 2 kind of like very fast screen units. A perfect example of which are Hexwraiths, which can have their 24-inch plus D6 advance, meaning that each one of those units are moving minimum 26 inches on the first turn. Sure, they won't be able to charge, but they are going to be potentially all over the table. And then there's also the boat guy, the Soul Seeker. So, or not Latron, the Soul Seeker, the other guy, the
Drowner. Yes,
Drowner.
He is criminally underused right now. He is so good.
Absolutely, yeah. So there are a lot of different ways to either get up in front of your opponent or potentially with good charges, be in their face, just not as obvious as Ironjawz with double pressure.
To clarify, the standard I typically use, and people can feel free to disagree with this, but the standard I use is if your army can reliably charge turn 1, then it's a fast army. Otherwise, it's a slow army. In terms of like clearing the board, right? So 8-inch move. Without a run and charge, typically won't get you there. Not all the time. Like people can deploy back, a couple inches, and then it's like, oh, okay, I have to pivot. I have to focus more on controlling objectives and preparing for a double turn potentially. So that's the standard, and that's why I say slow. 8 inches is certainly not a slow unit compared to like 4-inch move paladins. So yeah, definitely not like individually slow.
Yeah.
So they have this really terrifying ability to deploy 3 units in reserve after armies are finished deploying, which is just really messes with your opponent. It makes everything Nighthaunt do completely unpredictable. Do they take a big block of 30 ghosts and put them in reserve and then stick them in your face? Do they take min-sized squads and then put them all over the board to block up your charging lanes? It's a really powerful ability, and it really helps define the army. They also terrify units within 3 inches. Terrify on its own only means that those units can't receive Inspiring Presence, which makes Nighthaunt very good at cutting down Horde armies, because when you can't use Inspiring Presence, Battle Shock just finishes your units off for you. It's really strong. They have an artifact to auto-cast the Purple Sun, and let's be real, that's the only spell this army will ever cast with that artifact in its current incarnation. It basically makes the Purple Sun a part of the army.
Well, I mean, there's other. I mean, is there going to be an artifact section here?
There is, yes.
Okay, I'll wait. For
Yep, there's other artifacts for sure, but the Midnight Tome is like, yeah, that's the first one you pick, and the Purple Sun's the first spell you pick when you're casting. There's other things too, but like, you tell people I'm facing Nighthaunt, it's like, oh, watch out for that Purple Sun.
It's an allegiance ability at this point.
I think Nighthaunt are definitely a durable army. They may not be as durable as something like Nurgle, but when you have an army-wide 4+ ethereal on big horde units and always have a 6+ ward and easy access to a 5+ ward, yeah, this is a durable army, especially when they start reviving models every turn from every unit that you didn't kill, effectively. Very durable. They can tar pit you, they can turn it into a battle of attrition, which is perfect for them because they can retreat and charge, and those two things work really well together. Their support heroes are really good. Maybe the best support heroes in the game in terms of impact. Like, I wish I had support heroes this good in Stormcast. Seraphon support heroes are this good, I'll say that. But Stormcast, like, the Nighthaunt ones are so much better. It's crazy. -1 damage aura, +1 to wound aura, reviving models every turn. The Nighthaunt heroes have phenomenal support abilities. And that works well with their spirit hosts that make them really hard to snipe, because when you have a 3+ bodyguard around, it's really hard to shoot down those heroes through a 4+ ethereal, a 5+ ward potentially, and then the 3+ bodyguard if they don't use the ward. It's really hard to snipe those heroes. Mm-hmm. And then offensively, they have really powerful but random effects when charging. The Wave of Terror is either you're so glad that you have that ability, or you wish the ability was removed from the game and all your units just had +1 rend all the time and you didn't have to roll for it. But man, that Wave of Terror is game-changing, and it makes people approach the game differently when playing against Nighthaunt than any other army, because you really want to reduce the amount of units they can charge with. And balancing it all out is the fact that they have, I don't want to say no ranged power, but certainly the way people play Nighthaunt these days, there seems to be no powerful ranged force projection. There are units like the Black Coach and Olynder which can do damage from range, but they're not really seeing play right now, and that's probably because just tying stuff down with super durable punchy ghosts seems to be a better strategy. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that definitely sounds right.
Nailed it. Real quick, before we dive into the episode proper, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Kaiju Gaming Lounge. They're located in Orlando, Florida. They sponsor our painting contests, and coming soon, we're going to have some merchandise. So give them a check. They have a website coming soon at kaijugaminglounge.com. And Daniel, I think you're actually friends with the owners, so you want to speak to them real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't heard about them before, they're a really amazing organization. Really good friends with one of the founders. His name's Carl, and he's an amazing guy who's really helped grow AOS in Florida and is actively working to make sure there's always events going on. And so it's a very community-oriented, like organization, really. Like Kaiju Gaming Lounge is not just a sales point for them. It's a place where they want to build connections, and Carl really expounds upon that all the time. It's a super great org. I can't wait for them to really get truly up and running. They're working fast on it, so you'll probably be hearing a lot about them soon. So yeah, support when you can.
A quick word on effective health. So a lot of people may have just heard me talk about why Nighthaunt are so durable, and I just want to break it down really quickly here before we get into it, because this is going to come up repeatedly throughout this episode. So effective health is it's a term we use, and we're going to keep using. It's the damage you need to slay a model. So a model with 100 wounds requires 100 damage to slay, which means it has an effective health of 100. Pretty obvious. But this gets more complicated when you add in wards and save rolls. So on average, because it is still a dice game, right? Anything can happen. Ward rolls increase the damage required to slay a model. If you roll 100 dice, odds are some of those will be 6s, and then that 100 damage is no longer going to slay the model. And when you do the math, you find out that a 6+ ward is effectively adding 20% more health. A 5+ ward is effectively adding 50% more health, and a 4+ ward is adding 100% more health. It's doubling the amount of damage required. And save rolls work the same way, but they're changed by rend, and mortal wounds ignore them. So it's a little bit different. However, when you have ethereal, rend is effectively another ward roll. So effectively, everything in the Nighthaunt army, every 1 wound model immediately takes 2 wounds to kill, because you have to get through the 4+ ethereal, and then the ward save on top of that can make them effectively a through wound model. When you have a 4+ ethereal and a 5+ ward, a 30 wound unit suddenly requires 90 damage to kill. And that's what I mean when I talk about Nighthaunt being durable. You require a lot of damage in order to take these units out. And if you don't, they'll just start reviving. So keep that in mind. One last note here is that wards are not the counter to mortal wounds. They are just effective health. And we've talked about all this and more in Stormkeep number 19, Mortal Wounds 101. So check out that video if you'd like to learn more about this concept. Diving into the Nighthaunt Allegiance abilities, before we talk about any specific units, I wanted to talk about just the general battle traits, because they sort of define how the army is going to approach battle. So the first one here is Aura of Dread. This is what causes units to be terrified. Enemy units within 3 inches of any Nighthaunt unit have the terrified status, which on its own, all it does is that these units can't receive Inspiring Presence. There's a few other abilities here that work off units being terrified, but on its own, all it means is no Inspiring Presence. Ethereal was moved off the War Scrolls and turned into an Allegiance ability, which means it does a couple things, actually. Nighthaunt have a 6+ ward, and they ignore all modifiers to save rolls, which means you can't give them Mystic Shield, you can't give them all-out defense, but you can't also hit them with rend, so it goes both ways, positive and negative. You got rid of all of them. And the second thing Ethereal does is it allows every unit to fly, and it also allows them to retreat and charge, and that combination of flying, retreat, and charge is really gross. You can charge into stuff with your good durability, you survive the combat, and in the next turn you're retreating onto their objectives, flying past them, just not caring about them. Man, it really fits the Nighthaunt playstyle so well. They have Discorporate. I'm going to say that. It's a command ability. It's effectively their replacement for all-out defense. They can use it when they get attacked in the combat phase and in the shooting phase, and that unit gets a 5+ ward for the rest of the phase. It's basically all-out defense, but instead of getting +1 to save, you get a 5+ ward. +1 to your ward roll. Very, very powerful ability. Way more powerful than all-out defense. So definitely a key thing in this army. And the second most important thing, besides Discorporate, is Wave of Terror. So after charging, a Nighthaunt unit, depending on what your charge roll was, gets an effect, depending on what you roll. So if you rolled a 4 to 7, you can give an enemy unit -1 to hit. If you rolled an 8 to 9, you can give an enemy unit -1 to save, which is gross. And if you rolled a 10 or higher, you can give that unit Strike Last. And all of these effects stack with each other. So if they might not do anything, for example, if you give a unit Strike Last 3 times, it doesn't matter, because but you can always pick the lower result. So if you roll 3 11s on your charges, you can stun them twice and petrify them once, or you can shriek them 3 times. You can pick whatever combination you like. But this effect is really, really powerful. A stacking -1 to save roll is very, very strong, especially since a lot of units in this army already have rend, so going up from rend 1 to rend 2, rend 3, sometimes rend 4, if you get a bunch of good rolls, very, very gross. And when you combine that with Frightful Touch, which causes any hit roll of 6, this works on both melee and range, by the way, any hit roll of 6 automatically wounds. You don't make a wound roll, it just goes straight to the save roll. So when you combine, the fact that a lot of the army is going to be hitting on 2s or 3s, any hit roll of 6 automatically wounds, and then you have like rend 2 or 3 sometimes, it's a lot of damage that people don't expect. The final battle trait is Vanishing Phantasms. This is after deployment. You remove 3 of your units and you place them in reserve, and then you deploy them like you would with Signs of the Storm at the end of your movement phase, more than 9 inches from enemies. Now, I didn't note it here, but do you have to deploy them in your first movement phase, or can you hold on to them until the end of the game?
You have to put them in there. They can stay in ambush until the 3rd turn.
Right.
Like normal.
Because there's a general rule that any unit in reserve starting round 4 is slain.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. That ability is crazy. When we did our Battle Tome review, Murgonk, we had a list with Ulrak the Drowner, and then using this Vanishing Phantasm and just dumping your entire army on the enemy doorstep immediately and just trying to make as many charges as possible and tying them all down. And gosh, I hope that people don't play that list.
There's something you can do with that. Now, this doesn't have to doesn't have to be part of the list discussion section or anything like that, just because I don't think you're ever really going to see it unless someone's fully dedicated to it. But my old play style in the previous book was the taking advantage of the command ability to bring units to your general and throwing the Dreadblade Harrow up, and then in the start of the movement phase, and then using the command ability at the start of the movement phase to start bringing units towards him, and then half the army was in deep strike anyways. You can kind of recreate that same type of style with the Drowner, but you choose him as your general, get 1 or 2 Dreadblade Harrows, you do your once per battle round echo command abilities, and all of a sudden they are the other individual Dreadblade Harrows are echoing that same command ability and just pushing units off.
Played against that list. It's hilarious.
Thankfully, that list ends up spending so many points on Drowners and Dreadblade Harrows, and it has less bodies, which is, I think, the balancing point for this army is that the cost of the units are a little bit higher than a normal unit of its value would be, and I think it's because they don't want these kind of janky combos to be like you can have it all. You can have tons of units, and you can have all the heroes. Like, you got to pick one or the other. So right now, it seems like that style is not very popular, and I'm grateful for that, frankly. Grieving Legion with teleporting everything onto your doorstep turn 1 is so obnoxious to play against.
Mm-hmm.
It'll come back. It will be back. Probably after Season 1 is over, it'll be back.
Yeah.
For now, Bladegheist.
Spoilers.
Oops.
So we're going to look at some common enhancements here, and if you guys feel like I left anything off the list, feel free to mention it. So the most common command traits that we see for Nighthaunt players are typically Master of Magic, which allows you to re-roll a Cast, Unbind, and Dispel roll every turn. Sometimes they use Lingering Spirit just to give yourself more defense. It gives you a 4+ ward against mortal wounds. And then rarely, but when it happens, this one's really strong. Ruler of the Spectral Host. Once per game, on a 4+, you can revive a unit that has been slain with half its models. And what makes this ability so strong, if you get the 4+ dice roll, right? But what makes it so strong is that you set up wholly within 12 inches of the general and more than 3 inches from enemy units, that's usually not the case. Usually when abilities allow you to do this, it's more than 9 inches away, so the unit that gets revived is immediately really impactful. But you got to roll a 4 up.
Really good.
Yeah. But nobody takes it because you got to roll the 4 up, which is rough. Alex, do you think there's any other command traits that I'm missing here?
It depends on the combos that you want to try to do. I mean, like, I personally always mess with Master of Magic pretty heavily. The Lingering Spirit one, I generally don't use, nor have I really actually seen use. Rule of the Spectral Host, same thing. It's just a little too risky. There's quite a few though that like you would want to actually be aware of that I think are going to be a lot more common since they're being used a lot more as well. Looking at the command traits that they do have to offer besides Master Magic, because it is going to just be hyper common. Really looking at the ability to have Terrifying Entity, which is units are terrified when they're within 6 inches of the general rather than 3, is going to be one that you're going to see once in a while. Still not very common, but you can build your army in a way which can take advantage of that, especially with certain grand strategies. Cloaked in Shadow, when this book first came out, was the very first command trait that I saw that went, ooh, that's a great one. It's just we don't have any really good hardy character models besides a Cruciator or a Knight of Shrouds on Steed, but it's your general can only be picked as a target of a shooting attack, or combat attack by only 1 unit each phase. But I don't know if you guys have seen the Spiteful Spirit combo.
Yeah, we talked about that one in our review. But for people who haven't just watched a review 10 minutes ago, do you want to break it down?
Yeah. So with the Spiteful Spirit that was mentioned, of course, you can combine that ability, which is, at the end of the combat phase, if the general has any wounds allocated to them, you roll a dice number equal to the wound characteristic of the general for each 4-up, and an enemy unit within 6 inches suffers 1 mortal wound. That's all fine and dandy. But you generally are going to want to have that on a Knight of Shrouds, who is already going to have a mini version of a War Boss's ability so that every time it kills a model with its 5 attacks at damage 2, then it goes it heals a wound and it gains a wound to its wound characteristic. So all of a sudden you are plopping in with 6 or more dice, because not only are you rolling to see how many you're going into combat, you're potentially getting hurt, but you're also gaining wounds in for the game, and then you're rolling additional dice for those mortal wounds.
Yeah, and then there's also a final piece of that puzzle where I think it's like an artifact. I haven't looked at it in a while because I haven't seen anybody play it. But I think it's like a ring where if you slay anything, you heal, something like that.
That's the other one.
You can do that, which is that one is. Oh boy, what is the name of that one? It is called the Soulfire Ring. So every time you kill a model, you heal D6 wounds. That can be helpful if you really think that it's going to be risky that you're going to lose the guy. I generally don't like that combination just because there's other relics that you could give that character that could be pretty helpful. Some of my favorites would include things like the Reaper of Sorrows. I tend to have some fun with, which is it's already a Rend 1 sword, and that's the reason why there are some combat characters that I really like, that the only reason I use them is because of a minor benefit, like the Lord Executioner, which we can get to later. I love as a general, but a big selling point is that he's got the same attacks and same damage as the Knight of Shrouds besides the mount, but he's at Rend 2. So with Reaper of Sorrows, you pick an enemy unit before you make your attacks within an inch, and you roll 2d6. If you beat their bravery, so it's really against things with medium bravery. But if you beat or equal their target bravery, you have to be explicitly higher than their bravery. Then your rend goes from Rend 1 to Rend 3 instead, and so that's very helpful in a Knight of Shrouds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a shame a lot of these cooler combos don't see a lot of play because they're just not as efficient as bringing more ghosts. You could bring 10 Bladegheist Revenants instead, and just it's unfortunate.
Oh, pardon me, it was Rend 4 instead of Rend 3, because then they have that extra caveat saying that if you're terrified, it becomes Rend 4.
All right, well, speaking of artifacts, the ones that people are going to most often play against, first up is the Midnight Tome. I think that is slam jam that, your first pick hero every list. And since the only hero that can take it is the Guardian of Souls, well, you're also bringing a Guardian of Souls to every list, which is not bad because he's a fantastic hero. But the Midnight Tome is the artifact that allows the wizard once per game to automatically cast any endless spell on your list that can't be unbound. And since you're at the casting phase, it also can't be dispelled that turn either. So this is a phenomenal way to get out a ton of, when we reviewed the Nighthaunt book, we weren't too impressed with it. We thought it was really good, but we didn't think it would be as good as it is now because the endless spells kind of sucked. Endless spells last year were not good, but after the General's Handbook 2022, they are phenomenal. The update has made them all very good and very playable. And the Purple Sun among those has stood out the most. The extra rend is great because it fixes one of the core problems of Nighthaunt, which was that they only have rend when they're fighting offensively generally because you don't get Wave of Terror on your turn. Purple Sun just gives you more rend when you're fighting defensively. And it also, for a little while there, now that there's been an errata, but for a little while it was just instantly killing god monsters, and that was super satisfying too. So Midnight Tome, a triple plus artifact, if it's so good, you're going to see it in every Nighthaunt list.
I do think you're going to see it in more. I wanted to say too, it gives a lot more possibilities as well, because if you want to run different spells, you can with a lot of freedom. I think that there's a underslung or a underdog spell that people don't really utilize, and that's going to be the swords. The swords are fantastic in a meta with high ward saves and common ward saves, and so being able to cast that for free and have it move through and just do its business. I think that if you're not going to see the Purple Sun used by the auto cast, you're going to see either that or the swords, or you're going to see the endless spell, the Terminexus. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
We have, yeah. We talked about the endless spells, the Nighthaunt endless spells in our review. They're all good, honestly, but the Terminexus is the craziest one of all of them. Don't want to spend too much time on that stuff because nobody plays it right now, and we're talking about how to counter Nighthaunt, not how to review the book again. Yeah, the Midnight Tome is great. I love the Quicksilver swords. I think when Emerald Host gets more popular after the season changes, then the Quicksilver swords are going to add into that playstyle very well. They're going to be fun. I'd say the second most common artifact people use, it's probably going to be a tie, honestly, between the Arcane Tome and the Light Shard of the Harvest Moon. I'd say Arcane Tome gets more use just because gaining Wizard is really, really good in an army that will typically have one Wizard, which is the Guardian of Souls, and he's auto-casting the Endless Spell. So, like, if you want to cast the really good spells that Nighthaunt have, you're either bringing more Guardian of Souls or you're turning your expensive support heroes like the Cruciator into Wizards, and that just seems like a no-brainer. You got to get Shade Mist, you want to get Seal of Shyish, you want to get these things. And then the other artifact is the Light Shard of the Harvest Moon, which, while casting spells is generally defensive for Nighthaunt, the Light Shard is an offensive artifact. Once per game, it gives all Nighthaunt within 12 inches of the bearer, wholly within 12 inches, I should say, gives them +1 attack until the end of that phase. So that's like a 50 to 33% damage steroid for a key moment in a game, which is really, really useful. Is there anything I missed out on?
I don't really see Light Shard used very often. I do see it used. I would say, it's unfortunately, like you mentioned before, Midnight Tome is almost, and Arcane Tome are almost always the 80 to 90% of what you're going to see if you're fighting against a Nighthaunt player. Another one that you can see from time to time, especially on that combo that we talked about before with the Knight of Shrouds, is going to be the Reaper of, or not, pardon me, not the Reaper Sorrows like we talked about, but rather I just had it in front of me. The relic that is -1 to wound. It is, where is it? It is called Pendant of the Fell Wind, which is just, if you're within 3 inches of that character, then you are -1 to wound for melee weapons. So like you can throw a real small character, like a cheeky little Karen Wraith at a 25 mil base, just up and have that bubble. It can like sneak into little, nooks and crannies, or you get something with a large base, like a Knight of Shrouds on Steed, and all of a sudden that guy with his 70 by 40 mil base, now he's got that extra 3-inch bubble of -1 to wound, protecting him and the unit that he's probably flanked by.
Just imagine how useful some of these artifacts could be if the Black Coach was a hero and it could take them. It would be so good.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about the Arcane Tome and how useful it is to this army and how you're going to see it in 80 to 90%. And that's for a reason, because the Nighthaunt spell lore is excellent. 3 of the spells in particular are standouts. The first one being, in no particular order, first and second, I think, but they're really good. Seal of Shyish. It's easy to cast. It's on a 5. It has a low range, 12 inches, but that's not a big deal because it's a support spell. And it gives one of your friendly Nighthaunt units a 5 upward. And that doesn't sound like it would be as good as it is because you've got Discorporate, which is going to give you a 5 upward anyway. But there's problems with Discorporate. It only works in the combat and shooting phases, and it's a command ability, which means it can be stopped. Whereas Seal of Shyish, once this is active, it's active in every phase of the game until your next hero phase, and there's no way to disable it, unless you've got an Argonaut Admiral with a grenade or something. But it's not like you can shut it down with Roar or Geminids of Ulgish or anything like that. So this spell is phenomenal. And even though it doesn't stack with Discorporate, it's more reliable than Discorporate, and I think that's a big deal. The other spell we're talking about is Shade Mist. It's another defensive support spell that Nighthaunt can use, and you stick it on one of your units, a Nighthaunt unit, and enemies have -1 to wound against that unit. And this works on shooting and melee, and like Seal of Shyish, it lasts until your next hero phase. So when you stack these two on a unit of 30 Grimghast Reapers, you've got a super durable unit that your opponent is going to really hate fighting, or shooting, or just engaging with it anyway. It's awful. And then the last spell I think worth mentioning, because the other 3 really seem like something Nagash is going to cast, and the other heroes aren't going to bother. But the Spectral Tether, I think, is maybe a sleeper. Maybe people aren't using it enough. Maybe once Olynder comes into play, people will use this one more. But it's a super easy cast, only a 4. And what it does is it teleports the caster in the hero phase, which is really, really useful because Olynder, for example, can shoot immediately after teleporting. You can get your support heroes into range after using up your Vanishing Phantasms. You've put your 3 units in reserve, you've moved them onto the enemy front line, and boom, now your support hero is meeting up there with them. It's not seeing a lot of play right now because the other 2 spells are so good, but there is a place for Spectral Tether, and people should know that Nighthaunt can just teleport their wizards.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note that Spectral Tether is something that keeps Nagash on the table nowadays. Because if you're going to see Nagash, you used to see him almost exclusively in OBR. As we all might know, now you're almost only exclusively seeing him when you're fighting against a Nighthaunt player, because of the fact that the one thing he lacks is his mobility, and now all of a sudden he can be +3 to cast and just show up anywhere on the table.
Does it work on Nagash? I thought it specified
Yeah.
Nighthaunt caster.
So on Nagash's War Scroll, it says that when you're in the other army, because he doesn't get any allegiance ability, but he knows every spell from the spell lore of the Death Army.
Yeah. I thought for some reason the spell required a Nighthaunt caster, that one in particular. But I think you're right. Maybe not. Okay.
Double check that.
I just honestly haven't seen Nagash in months. Nobody plays him anymore. So.
Oh yeah, it just says you pick up the caster. Oh, and it's casting value 4 too, which is the best part.
Yeah. It's just guaranteed. You stick Nagash in a corner and he's teleported. He's somewhere else.
Yeah.
All right, diving into subfactions here before we talk about units. The first subfaction is the Grieving Legion and has what seems like a really easy and restricted ability, but it's also incredibly powerful, and I think people haven't explored just how good this is. But enemy units can't retreat if they're within 3 inches of any Nighthaunt unit that has 10 or more models. So a pack of 10 Chain Rasp, a pack of 10 Bladegheist, a pack of 10 Grimghast Reapers. If you're within 3 inches of any of these units, you cannot retreat. And as we say all the time on our show, retreating is how you win the game. Forcing the enemy to retreat is also how you win the game. But keeping them in place is really how you win the game, because you win the game through movement, right? Tying stuff down wins you games, and that ability is one of the best in the entire game for that. Even in a vacuum, it's really good. But when you attach it to an army that they can freely retreat and fly and charge anywhere they want, it's unbelievable amounts of zone control. It's fantastic. But it's not that popular right now because, well, we'll talk about what is popular and why it's popular, and you'll understand. Grieving Legion takes effort. The thing that's popular right now takes less effort. The next subfaction is the Emerald Host, which is a very straightforward ability. You pick D3 units, and you deal, D3 plus 1 units, and at the end of each battle round, those units take D3 mortal wounds, or +1 if it's a monster. And this has to be picked at the start of the game, which means if you have a unit in reserve, you can't pick it with your curse, and you still have to roll a 2+ to activate this ability. So it's not totally reliable. The fact that it's a random amount of damage, it has a chance to fail, and the number of units you pick is random, and that damage happens at a weird time. The end of a round is usually probably the worst time to deal damage, because it's going to be very rare that that's going to be the amount of damage needed to finish something off. And then at the start of the round, immediately, heroes, for example, and most hero monsters, can just use Heroic Recovery to try to heal through it. So it's a good ping effect, but you kind of have to build into it, which doesn't seem like you have to, but on its own it's not very strong. But when you add stuff like the Black Coach, Olynder, Quicksilver Swords, when you go into this like ping mortal wound style that pretty much nobody's doing right now, I think that ability can get really good. Do you have any experience playing Emerald Host?
I do, and very quickly I realized that it was not for me. For the exact reasons that you just mentioned. The mortal wounds are an if. You can't always target the thing that you want, especially if something's in reserve. In addition to that, I was talking to my teammate Jeremy, and he's very insightful. He's also a very high-ranked player, and we will spar with each other, and we were just on it, and it literally came down to us going, okay, well, let's just roll off. Let's pretend like we're just playing a game. Doesn't matter what we're playing, doesn't matter what we're doing, we're just rolling at the end of each round. And it's like, cool. I was like, I do D3 mortal wounds. He's like, okay, let's roll priority. Oh, I get the top of my turn, great, I'm gonna do Heroic Recovery. So it's
Yeah.
like your buff characters, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna maybe hurt buff characters, but like more often than not, like against a competent player, especially against a player who might have like ward saves or easy access to ways to heal, and Stormcast certainly can have these kind of defenses on their units as well. It's just not going to be something that you're going to have to worry about. So like if you go up against a Nighthaunt player and it is an Emerald Host person, all your characters that really matter are like minimum 5 wounds, so it's really not going to be that huge of a deal.
It'll take 3 rounds on average, assuming it makes the 2+ each time, to kill a 5-wound hero. And if they don't Heroic Recovery, and if nothing else kills them in the meantime, it's such an underwhelming amount of damage. there's too many checks on it. Frankly, I think it doesn't need the 2+. It could just happen, and I think it'd still be fine.
I was going to say, that's a little counterintuitive that it's something that you want to be doing damage to. So, like, once you kill it in the game, you're almost, like, losing efficiency on your effect, right? Like, it's something that, it just feels so weird of an effect.
There are some uses for it, but, like, yeah, you know, there's a grand strategy that can be involved in a specific subfaction, which is, you know, you pick an enemy unit on the battlefield with the highest bravery characteristic, and if there's multiple units, then you get to pick the unit that has the same bravery characteristic. So if it's like a demon army, it's like, you know, I could pick, you know, this really hard to kill, you know, I could pick Bellicor, but I can also pick 5 Fleshhounds, you know. And so, you know, you would want to do that and then maybe try to constantly curse that like really weak non-ward saved unit. But like, it's very situational and matchup based.
If it's a Bellicor list, it has a ward. That's even
you're right.
But no, that's pretty much the point of this ability. Is it kind of leans into something that Nighthaunt don't do very well, which is ranged power projection. And I think that's why a lot of people are really hot on this at first, because they're like, oh, I've got this huge melee army, and this thing's going to be raining mortal wounds down. But in practice, it's just really random, and it's not reliable. Yeah. And if you want to do mortal wounds, well, guess what? The next subfaction is really, really good at doing mortal wounds. The Scarlet Doom, which in our Battletome review we predicted would be the best subfaction even before this whole veteran bounty hunter system came into play. So I don't know if we were correct or if the meta just shifted too quickly. But the Scarlet Doom, first off, it makes your Bladegheist Revenants battle line, which in Season 1 means they become veteran units, which is very, very good. After charging, the Bladegheist Revenants deal damage equal to their unit size. So you roll a number of dice equal to the number of models. So if you got 10 models, you roll 10 dice. And each 5+ immediately deals a mortal wound. Now, this does have the restriction that you have to pick one unit within 1 inch of the unit, but this isn't 1 inch of each model. So if you have 10 dudes and you charge on a flank, only one dude's in range, you still do all of the mortal wounds from that one guy. And that, you know, on its own sounds pretty weak. Oh, I deal 2 to 3 mortal wounds when I charge. Cool, not a big deal. But then Scarlet Doom makes these guys battle line, so there's going to be a lot of them on the list. You're going to have squads of double reinforced ghosts that are averaging 10 mortal wounds before they make any attack rolls, before Wave of Terror does anything. They can just wipe out screens by charging at them. And if you charge like multiple units, each one does this effect. It's a really, really powerful ability. And the mortal wounds are something that Nighthaunt really don't do otherwise. We just talked about the Emerald Host being so, presumably valuable because it does mortal wounds. Nighthaunt are not a high mortal wound army, and Scarlet Doom just does it. It fixes a core problem with one of the armies. It's so good, and when you play against Nighthaunt, I'd say 9 times out of 10 these days it's going to be Scarlet Doom.
Yeah, a huge one is last point, wiping out screens just by charging them. I mean, even as an Annihilator player, like something about charging screens and then getting right past them into the rest of the army is just really strong. Gosh, Scarlet Doom is so good, and you can take all these Bladegeists, and the veteran makes it so that they can fight in 2 ranks, so they couldn't before because they're only 1 inch reach normally. Crazy.
Yeah, that was the thing holding back the subfaction, but that's not a restriction anymore. So have at it. It's so good.
This is something that is a common question among every player or most players in this game right now when we start talking about the next season, because like this army, yes, you're fully right. If there wasn't such a thing as Galatian veterans, the effectiveness of Scarlet Doom would be way
it would be acceptable. It would be an acceptable level of effectiveness.
Yeah.
But like now the question is like, you open the box, you can't put it back in, without pissing off a lot of people.
Yeah, it's tough, but I mean, even in MSU, Scarlet Doom gets really good. I mean, gosh, you just multi-charge, which is something that you kind of want to do anyway.
Yep.
And then you get mortals out, and that helps with getting people in. I think it'll still be great after all this. Something maybe we talk about in a little bit.
I think they might make like double rank fighting permanent.
I hope they do.
Yeah.
It just makes infantry fun, like being able to just like double fight and not have to worry about stupid 1 inch reach on like 10 inch coherency. It's just either they fix coherency or they like just make like the bonds of battle, whatever, permanent.
Yeah, like a battle line thing, right?
Yeah.
I'd rather fighting in 2 ranks, because that would affect
Yeah.
cavalry too. I hope they make that an ability for everything, not just infantry. I would love to use a squad of 6 Dracolines again. That would be great.
Well, yeah. I mean,
All
you
right.
can. You just have to do that flower thing you don't like.
I hate that flower thing, man. Don't even talk about it. I hate it. All right, so the last subfaction for Nighthaunt is the Quicksilver Dead, and this makes your Dreadscythe Harridans, which are another fighting unit that Nighthaunt can use, makes them battle line, and their melee attacks ignore wards, which seems really, really, really good. However, ignoring wards is not as good as just murdering things with mortal wounds on the charge, unfortunately. And then sometimes, even if you're fighting stuff with wards, Scarlet Doom is better. And then sometimes you fight things without wards, and you're like, oh, I've done nothing. I've picked nothing for a subfaction. My allegiance ability is nothing. Yeah, Scarlet Doom is just, that's what we're going to be talking about mostly today.
Yeah. I did the math. I was helping one of my friends out with his, Nighthaunt building, and he was going for Harridans. He's like, oh, I really hate the Nurgleflies matchup, and I'm like, dude, I'm looking at the math here. It's got to be like a 4-up ward before they even out. Like a 5-up ward, it's still better to go Scarlet Doom and take the Bladegheist. You lose out on like 1 unit of Harridans, but even then, like they, even though like Harridans have 1 more attack to 4 attacks, the Revenants come with Rend, and they're more accurate. They can get to 2s and 2s, where Harridans just go to 3s and 3s. So it's tough to argue for Harridans right now versus Scarlet Doom.
I do agree that it's a lot more obvious that Scarlet Doom is just clearly stronger. But if you get a very competent player, or somebody who's just very Silver Dead, I've only seen it with success. I've seen someone use it with success at only 1 tournament so far, but like, Stormcast players obviously don't have to worry about it too much, because the Harridans are going to be damage 1 rend dash. But like, you look, normally you sleep on their war scroll because you see 4 attacks at 4s, but there's very easy ways between spells and abilities to make them be hit, to make them their characteristics to be 3 and 3 instead. So all of a sudden you have 1 more attack than a Bladegheist, no rend, so 1 less rend, but you have 4 attacks or potentially 5 attacks instead of 3, and ignoring wards. Bye bye Gotrek, bye bye DOK.
It's a situationally powerful ability. When it's powerful, it's really good. But the problem is that there's a lot of matchups where it'll do nothing for you. And it's like, if you're taking a list to an event, or let's just say you're going to a club night, you don't know what you're going to play against. It's like, do you want to take the list that you know is going to be consistently good, or do you want to take the one that's maybe a little bit stronger in the right scenario? And it's just easier to take the Scarlet Doom one. Now, if you want to play Harridans, Quicksilver Dead is great. It's good in this meta. There's a lot of wards out there, and Harridans are a fun unit and a cool looking model that has not seen enough play since 2nd edition. So I'm down with pushing Quicksilver Dead on people.
Yeah, and I mean they gain the, I think it's +1 hit and wound if they have like models slain in a unit, like the first time they hit something, they wouldn't have it. For example, I don't know. As I was doing the math on it, it really takes a 4-up ward before it matters. It's kind of crazy.
Unit's lost anything at all, if the unit's not at its full strength, then you're +1
it's
hit
3s.
So,
but even with that, I was looking at it, even with Bladegheist with 2s and 3s, because they don't always, +1 to wound would be from the hero. Even with 2s and 3s, the Bladegheist, because of the charge, the fact they have the extra rend, that 1 attack is great, but even on 3s and 3s versus a 2s and 3s Bladegheist, because of the rend, because of the charge mortals, they still do more damage into anything with a 5-up, 6-up ward. It's interesting. You would think that it wouldn't be, and that's why I saw a lot of people a little bit sidetracked, get like kind of scared of the kangaroos getting ignore wards. It all comes down to damage. In the end, damage in the game is what matters a lot.
Yep.
And if you're playing Nighthaunt, you're going to be charging, right? You've got to retreat and charge. So you're always doing those mortals, and your Harridans, of course, are -1 to wound, which is kind of nice. They're a little tankier when you charge. But if they're dead, they can't hit you.
Damage is utility.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we've broken down how the army plays and their major allegiance abilities, but let's talk about individual units. I've made a list here highlighting the most commonly played units, and then at the end, if there's any miscellaneous units we want to toss on there, we can do that. But I think, obviously, the first unit you put in every single Nighthaunt list is a Krulghast Cruciator. There's at least one in every list, because it stacks. And redundancy is also a good thing. But this guy is so good that he is in every single Nighthaunt list. I have not seen one tournament list for Nighthaunt that doesn't have this guy in it. So why is he in every list? Well, it's not for his damage. His damage it's okay, but like you don't really care, right? It's negligible. Not because it's low, but it's like that's not why he's there, right? He does 8 damage in melee with reasonable accuracy, right? He hits like a couple of ghosts, and he has like a fairly weak shooting attack that you should remember exists because it could do something, so you might as well keep using it. And Frightful Touch does work on shooting, so keep that in mind as well. Auto wounding on hit rolls of 6. He is 6 wounds with a 4-up save, so he's one of the more durable Nighthaunt heroes. A lot of them are 5 wounds on a 4-up save. And the reason you bring him, of course, is his -1 damage aura. And this is an incredibly powerful effect, reducing the damage characteristic of weapons by 1. Normally, it's just really, really good, but in this era right now where Bounty Hunters is seeing play, which gives damage 1 weapons, it pumps them up to damage 2, this effectively negates it. And it's like you're playing an army in the previous season, all the benefits of this season, none of the downsides. It's really good. Now, we should clarify how this aura works, because it's not just like a Gardas Steel Soul aura, which just affects units within 12 inches. There's actually a condition on it. And this condition is the Cruciator has to be within 12 inches of a terrified unit. He buffs all the friendly units around him, but he still has to be within 12 inches of a terrified unit. When you have that condition met, this works on all attacks, melee and shooting, and it works in every phase. It's not limited to just the combat and shooting phases. So it's a very, very powerful ability, but it requires a little bit of positioning. And the last thing I want to note here is that the Cruciator kind of only does that damage reduction aura. So people will usually give him an Arcane Tome so that he can add additional utility, because he's going to be hanging around these units anyway. He wants to be wholly within 12 inches of them. So giving him an Arcane Tome to cast the Seal of Shyish or Shade Mist makes a lot of sense, because those are all the same ranges.
Yeah, it's crazy. Something to note that's not immediately obvious from the ability is it works on other units that aren't terrifying something. So you can have, an enemy unit engaged with your unit on one side of the Cruciator and have something in the back line, like one of your support heroes. And if you try to shoot that, it still works. It's crazy the utility on this. It's very flexible of an ability.
It's probably one of the best defensive units in the game, like pound for pound.
Yeah, what if you could bring a unit to your army that gave you the Seraphon Scaly Skin? Of course you'd bring it every single time. It's so good.
Yeah, and the fact that it stacks is amazing. One side note, it's interesting because he is comparable to a lot of order heroes that are 6 wounds, that have a ward save as well. And of course it's 4-up save. You mentioned that it's, I see it on its attacks. Yeah, you are right. It's 4 attacks at 3s, 2 rend, 1 damage at range, and then it actually is 4 attacks in close combat.
Yeah, let me clarify that point here, because going forward, it's going to be throughout every slide. For the sake of making it easier to understand, I like to combine the attacks and damage together. So like 4 attacks at 2 damage, that's 8 damage. So it's like, here's the max damage and here's the accuracy, which is hit, wound, rend. So it kind of gives people a better idea, because it can be really confusing to have like a bunch of numbers thrown at you and be like, well, I don't know how much really I should be worried about this thing. But it's like, 8 damage, pretty poor accuracy. 3s, rend 1 is not highly accurate by any means. I think it's less than 50% just to get to the saves. So it's fine, right? Most damage you're going to take in melee against the Cruciator is 8. You're not really worried about him. He's not the thing you're scared of.
Yeah.
And that's going to be consistent throughout the rest of how we do this episode. All right, the next hero that is, I think it's fair to say this guy's going to be in every list, because you need a Midnight Tome, and he's the only hero that can bring it. He's the only non-unique wizard. This is the Guardian of Souls. So again, negligible damage like the Cruciator. That's not why you bring him. He's a support unit. He has a little bit less wounds than the Cruciator, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but every single wound against Nighthaunt matters because of their 4+ save and their bodyguards and all this stuff. So that one wound can make a big difference. In addition to using the Midnight Tome that we talked about, he has a +1 to wound aura, which only works on melee weapons. So just keep that one in mind. Frightful Touch works on shooting, but this only works on melee. To benefit from this aura, units have to be wholly within 12 inches of the Guardian, and he has a really tiny base, so that's a pretty small aura. And Nighthaunt units usually wound on 3s, Harridans wound on 4s, but let's just say they usually wound on 3s. So on average, that's a 25% damage increase. It's a big boost. This guy is a big damage steroid for Nighthaunt. That does not count for Fretful Touch. That's a whole other calculation I didn't want to get into. So let's just say it's a 25% damage increase, and we'll leave it at that. His signature spell is also really good. It revives D6 models from a Nighthaunt unit. So you can revive D6 Spirit Hosts, and they can soak more wounds for you. Or you can revive more Bladegheist. So keep reviving stuff all game long. It's pretty nasty. And as we mentioned, the Midnight Tome, probably going to use it to cast the Purple Sun. And it is worth noting that if this guy is set up in reserve, he cannot cast the Purple Tome that turn, because you have to cast in the hero phase, and he deploys in the movement phase. So if you see them put the Guardian of Souls in reserve to try some kind of deep strike shenanigans, then you know that you're safe from Purple Sun for at least that turn. Downsides.
I love that you called it the Purple Tome, by the way.
Did I say Purple Tome? Nice.
You sure did.
Honestly, if you see your opponent do that, just chuckle to yourself internally a little bit, because you're usually going to have at least one or two good shooting units, and sure, he'll be 9 inches away, like you talked about Cruciator. He's not crazy in combat. The most he can do to you is 8 damage again, but he's going to be 3 hit 2s to wound, because his aura is going to affect himself. Regardless of that, it's still just 1 rend, and that's okay, and you're going to be able to just shoot him off the table in your turn before he gets a chance to pop that. So unless he's got 3 to 6 spirit hosts near him, which we can talk about later, of course, you should be able to just be like, oh no, close, your caster's close to me.
If your opponent ever leaves Nighthaunt heroes without spirit hosts nearby, you're like, oh, cool, thank you, I appreciate that. So much obliged. So it is worth noting that aside from auto-casting the Purple Sun, this guy's actually a really lousy wizard. He has no bonuses to cast. He only casts 1 spell. He'll probably be doing, Shade Mist or Seal of Shyish, which are, to be fair, they're pretty easy casts on 5 and 6, but with no bonuses to cast, it's actually pretty easy to just unbind it and get rid of that stuff. And then if your Purple Sun gets dispelled and he's trying to recast it, probably not going to happen. Even with Master of Magic, a 9+ is a hard cast, so that's worth noting. If you can weather the first Purple Sun, you're in a good position. And speaking of which, let's talk about one of the heroes of the Nighthaunt army, the Purple Sun. So it was recently changed at the end of last month. It received an updated War Scroll errata. It does have a cast value of 8 and a dispel value of 9, therefore. And I just put some quick stats up there. You can see casting a 9 with no bonuses or anything is a 28%. And then if you get bonuses to that, and if you can reroll that, you can see the stats up there. Units within 6 inches of the Purple Sun have -1 to save rolls, which conveniently doesn't affect Nighthaunt because they're ethereal. So all upside, no downside. And then units within 1 inch of the Purple Sun after it moves can either be instantly killed if they roll a 1, or take D6 plus 6 mortal wounds if they have a certain wound threshold. I think it's if you have 10 or more wounds, then you just take mortal wounds instead, which still has a high chance of killing you. Frankly, if you're a 10 wound model, you can still instantly die. This will almost always be autocast into play with the Midnight Tome. You can't unbind this. If you brought a Knight in Cantor, the Voidstorm Scroll does not work against the Midnight Tome. There's a few effects like this. Caradron Overlords have their spell in a bottle. This is another one of those. So let's set up some quick threat ranges here, because that's really what matters. When you're playing against the Purple Sun, you want to know how far do I need to be to not get affected by it. So it's set up wholly within 8 inches of the caster, and it moves 8 inches immediately, and then its instant kill effect is 1 inch. So if you stay within 17 inches of the wizard, you have a chance to be instantly killed. You can block its movement, and you can do other things, but this is just in general the max range it can go. Whereas the -1 save aura affects units within 6 inches. So if you want to avoid that, make sure your units are more than 22 inches away from the caster.
I believe the eating range is 3 inches.
It got changed in the new errata to 1 inch.
That got changed too?
Yes.
That was a big one too. That was good. Now you don't have to put your models like 6 inches away from each other thing.
Coming from a Nighthaunt player, I gotta say, the likelihood of you seeing this is not a lot because of its price increase and all of these changes.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
If we're talking about an endless spell here, the Torment Nexus by far is going to be a lot more dangerous, especially against Stormcast players and a lot of other matchups, because I thought at first that they errated it and accidentally put its old War Scroll out, but then they kind of like doubled down on it recently as well. So right now you have, for the same amount of points, because what the for 5 points less than the Purple Sun, you have something that has a 24-inch. Well, you deploy it 18 inches from the caster, and then it moves 12 inches. And then it's got a 6-inch bubble of 2-up D3 mortal wounds.
Yeah.
Like,
the Terminexus is great.
Here's my question.
It's 5 points less.
Okay, here's my question then. Most of the Nighthaunt lists I've been seeing are typically 1970 points. So 1970, 1975 points. So they typically, I've seen them have space for a 20-point increase in Purple Sun.
Absolutely.
That being said, for overall consistency, do you think Purple Sun is better, or is the Terminexus better? Because in my opinion, like one of the matchups that I've seen, for instance, that Nighthaunt has had problems with is like Beast of Chaos or like Guard sometimes. And do you think like Purple Sun is just more consistent than Terminexus in those kinds of matchups, or no?
It's too soon to tell with the change with the Purple Sun. Really don't think you're gonna. I mean, just and again, that's another situation where the Terminexus, which again is only 85 points, is going to be something that is going to be a lot more helpful for a Nighthaunt player, because it's going to be a 6-inch bubble on a 50 mil base against Beast of Chaos. If you throw that, Beast of Chaos. I know with you don't often see a lot of really hyper aggressive Stormcast armies, but if you do have one with like a bunch of chariots or something else, you have like deep striking annihilators, like you mentioned, or like someone mentioned earlier, a big challenge can sometimes be screens and being able to eliminate screens. Well, Nighthaunt can eliminate those screens through the use of this Terminexus, basically teleporting backfield, eating at the things that are being protected by the bubble wrap, and also eating away at the bubble wrap at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got such a big wide net. And then just thinking about my matchups, because I have a few friends who main Stormcast, and I can tell how my games have gone. Only in a few situations when somebody's, like shined the light on their paladins and they're mystic shielded and they're all out defensed, does the Purple Sun really play a role in being like, oh man, good thing I'm like -3 rend and I got that Purple Sun now, so it's like there have been situations where it's been very helpful. And the eating units was always like a kind of like a cherry on top situation. But I always liked my Triumph. I always liked being able to have the Bloodthirsty Triumph. And yeah, my list being at 1970 was always very helpful, because most of the time I was going to be able to get that free reroll to charge against my opponent. So being, just 5 points less can just help contribute a little bit more to that. Plus, especially against the Stormcast player, it's an easier spell to cast. It's casting value 6 instead of casting value 8. And it's got that range and mortal wounds. So I think that if a Stormcast player is going to see a Nighthaunt person on the table, they do need to be a lot less concerned. I mean, like, I still think the Purple Sun situationally is going to be very, very helpful against Stormcast, but definitely be aware of and be ready for the Terminexus, because that can hit, depending on what your army is like, and if you're not like very, very, very spread out, which you generally don't want to be, this can cause some issues.
Sorry, just real quick. My main point was like you said, it's the 8 versus the 5. With a Purple Sun, you essentially need to like roll a 9 to try and dispel it, and without Master of Magic, which we're not going to discuss the battle scroll, but without that trait, it's not a very easy dispel. Whereas Purple Sun, if I roll a 6, I roll 7s on charges pretty well. Everyone here will attest to that. So I'm finding like the Terminexus isn't a problem, but yeah, I could definitely see Purple Sun still sticking around for some lists.
Oh, for sure.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that in a world where Master of Magic isn't common, the Terminexus looks a lot better. But one of the strengths right now of the Purple Sun is that it's inconsistent to get rid of it. Because as you can see here, even a 9 reroll is a 48%. It's a coin flip, basically. And so you constantly get value out of that. And while the Purple Sun is out, you're casting Seal of Shyish, you're casting Shade Mist, you're casting other spells, getting more value. So if you have to cast Terminexus every turn, especially without the Master of Magic reroll, it's not looking as interesting. But at the same time, it's harder to dispel. So we'll see what happens. But Terminexus is great. I will absolutely echo everything you've said about it. It's very useful. So we don't derail this further. If you're interested in learning about the Terminexus, check out our Nighthaunt Battletome review. We talk about it there. It is very, very strong. Worth noting for dispelling is that wizards and priests can both dispel. A lot of people forget that priests can dispel, and when they take Master of Magic, both of them can re-roll this. So if you happen to have, for example, a Lord Relictor General with Master of Magic and an Arcane Tome, well, he'd have to give up one spell and one prayer to dispel in his turn, but he can do that, and he can re-roll it as well. So it's very handy. And another thing to note here, a lot of people don't know this rule exists, but in the core rules that says that endless spells cannot be recast the same turn they are dispelled. So if during your Nighthaunt player's turn, at the start of that turn, you dispel their Purple Sun, they cannot cast that Purple Sun in that same turn. So there might even be a little bit of space to kind of metagame when you want to dispel.
So here's a question. There's a lot of fantastic allies for Stormcast, two of which I see all the time. One of which being the Battle Mage for the,
You're going to say Rune Lord, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about it.
Love the Rune Lord.
Always gotta say, my buddies that I play with, my teammates that I play with, I'm starting to see a little bit more Battle, but I've seen a lot of Rune Lord. Rune Lords have definitely hosed me. It's like Master Magic. Let's say I get off my 8 cast or my 9 cast or whatever, and it's just consistently, +2. Oh, here, okay. Here's a 10. Here's an 11.
+3 if you're on Arcane. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love the Rune Lord.
It's like taking the Rune Lord sometimes over the Knight Incanter, because so many of these armies that are coming out are just like auto cast and you can't unbind it, or auto just put something at, like Tzeentch has it now, Nighthaunt has it now. Even technically, I think they do have a trait that lets them do that, or an artifact that lets them do that. Like they can cast a spell and not have it be unbound.
Not an endless spell though. I think it's just their lore spells.
Lore of the Vines, or whatever their thing is. But like more and more armies are coming out with this, so the Incanter's value is actually going down, which I'm kind of sad about. But then again, if I'm spending 95 points, it's much better than 125.
Gotta say, I've played against I played like 40 tournament games against Stormcast in the last 2 years. I've seen a Knight Incantor once.
Yeah, it's less popular than you might think, I'll say.
Wow.
I was running 2 in Ontario for years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my old Aether Strike list was
I actually,
so good.
that was what I played in LVO 2020, just before the pandemic. I think he was there. I think Alex was there too. I don't know what I saw.
I was there. Yeah. Wait. Which was SoCal?
No.
LVO.
LVO 2020. This was when Slaanesh took first place. Remember?
Oh yeah. I was in top 8.
Top 8 Stormcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you were.
Yeah.
Very nice.
As usual,
Oh, that was literally my first GT. What are you talking about?
What? No, that's not true.
No, that was LBO 2020 was my first GT. Yeah.
Well, we have been talking for
Yeah,
years
yeah,
before that
yeah.
point.
We've just been talking, but I never played competitively. That was like my first, I was super nervous. I was like, my nerves were a wreck. And then William, who's super nice, by the way, he was playing Slaanesh. He's one of the best players I've ever seen. His army was beautiful too. He wrecked me. He knew exactly what he was doing.
When did you get eliminated in top 8?
Well, I top 8 first match. I faced William.
Same.
So yeah, back then, Slaanesh had that stupid summoning, but we're getting derailed. Let's continue with that.
Speaking of stupid summoning, the Spirit Torment is another. I would say if you've got a triad of Nighthaunt heroes that are in every list, it's Night Cruciator, Guardian of Souls, and Spirit Torment. There are some lists that maybe cut the Spirit Torment, but those are bad lists. Don't play those lists. Spirit Torment is really good. Again, negligible damage output. You don't care how much damage he's doing in melee. He's less durable than the Cruciator. He's at that same Guardian 5 wounds. But the reason you bring him is because at the end of the combat phase, even if there was no fighting, you pick a unit and you revive 3 wounds worth of models. So that means 3 ghosts or 1 spirit host. Every single turn. Your turn, your opponent's turn. Doesn't matter if you fought. It doesn't matter how far away the enemy is. You could have a million dudes in melee with you, or they could be holed up in the corner trying to shoot you down. It doesn't matter. Every turn you revive 3 ghosts. And that is a disgustingly good ability, and it means that if you're not wiping out units of Nighthaunt, which is, again, hard to do because of their high effective health and their defensive spells and all that stuff, if you're not fully wiping out the units, it's going to rapidly come back into the game. It's going to be gross. Now, I will also point out here, this is in the core rules, if models are revived, they still count towards Battle Shock. So if you kill 20 ghosts and they revive 3 of them, well, you're still taking a battle shock as if 20 ghosts died.
And it used to be able to heal or bring back models from anything Nighthaunt. Now it's explicitly summonable units. So if somebody tries to pull that on you, it's just summonable units that it heals now.
Yeah, so what does that exclude then? The Myrnmourn Banshees. What else is on that list?
Heroes?
Heroes. the
No,
Black
no.
Coats.
Banshees count.
Are they summonable?
They're summonable. Yeah,
Okay.
it literally is just not the named characters and the coach.
Oh, yeah.
and
it just
the
revives.
Mongol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you meant that you could like revive. There was something missing from the revive table. No.
No.
If it's if it's a unit with more than one model, it can be revived.
It's really good. It's one of the few death resurrection abilities that I've seen that work in like both turns. Usually only get one. Like death likes to resurrect in their own turn a lot, but yeah, this is the few that I've seen that's like both, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
This is another hero that they'll stick Arcane Tome on just to get more value out of it, because the Cruciator is such a big target. Oftentimes people will give the Arcane Tome to the Spirit Torment instead, because the Cruciator's like, gotta kill that guy, can't let him live. And so the Arcane Tome is just gone at that point, so people usually stick it on the Spirit Torment in that case.
Frankly, up until recently, I was running Spirit Torment as my general 2 note fighting against Nighthaunt. These heroes are only 115 points. So for what it does, like it makes back its points in like 2 turns.
Must be nice to have properly costed heroes in your army.
How much is a Lord Relictor? It can't be that much.
145.
145.
145, yeah.
He's worth it, but
He's one of the few heroes that is probably effectively pointed.
Wait, how much is the Knight Incantor then?
125, and that's the second hero that's costed well.
Yeah, I was about to say, that one's pretty good.
Lord Imperatant, who pretty much gives you a free command every turn and gives you 7-inch deep strike, he's 175.
That's pretty pricey for what he does.
Pricey.
It's a tax for Annihilators.
Yeah.
So Annihilators are not 240. Annihilators are like, 310.
No, they're 400. 415.
Yeah, well, you can put the full amount. I was trying to be a little generous with some of the points.
Annihilators, then they're like 360 something. Yeah.
Wow.
Basically.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on. The last hero I wanted to talk about today, just because she is very impactful and very iconic. She's not seeing a lot of play right now, but that's okay. But I think people should know how this model works and why she's a threat, because she will see play. A War Scroll this good is like 20 points away from being included in every list. So Lady Olynder, the Mortarch of Grief, she is very strong. She's got 7 wounds with a 4-up save and always has a 4-up ward, which means she has an effective health of 28. So you see that War Scroll and you see 7 wounds, and it's like, nah, man, that should say like 30. She's super durable, and she still has Spirit Hosts around her that can absorb wounds as well. She is a War Master, so she's always counting as a general and for command abilities and for specific janky combinations that we'll talk about later when we talk about the Harrow Blades or the Dreadblade Harrows. She has okay melee damage. Like, she's not that much better than any of the other heroes we've looked at so far. 8 at one attack, 6 at another attack. Ren 2 is nice. You can get that up to Ren 3, Ren 4 with a Wave of Terror stacking. But like 8 damage per melee phase, sometimes 14. It's not spectacular. The reasons she's good are all of her utility and her shooting attack. So first up, once per battle, she revives D6 models from every Nighthaunt unit on the table. So you've killed a bunch of Spirit Hosts, you've killed a bunch of Ghosts, you've spent this time sniping heroes, and she just revives D6 models from every single unit. There's no limit. She can be anywhere on the table. She doesn't even have to have line of sight. It just happens, and you got to deal with it. So you could wipe down. You could have I've had this situation happen. Block the 30 Bladegheist Revenants. You even hit them with a battle shock. You kill 20. You kill 18 of them, and then there's 2 models left in the unit. Even after the Spirit Torment revives, there's 2 models left in the unit, and then on their turn, they resurrect with Olynder D6, they resurrect with the Guardian of Souls D6, and at the end of the combat phase, they resurrect 3, then they double turn, and they do the D6 resurrect, and then they do another Spirit Torment, and it's like, oh, well, all right, I basically did nothing on my turn, that's great. It's frustrating.
There's a spooky, scary skeletons theme going over and over again this whole time.
Another big thing with Olynder is that units within 12 inches of her that receive commands, they just don't receive that command if she rolls a 5. It's like, oh, you used all out defense? No, you didn't.
She takes a command point too. You've used it.
No. Yeah, you spent it.
Yeah.
The Nighthaunt.
Okay, she doesn't take it to herself. Sorry, I guess I meant that you've counted as issuing it, and it's used up the command point.
Can't be issued again. Can't be received, but that unit can't receive another command. It's just sorry. That just counterspell. Done. It's over. And then her main source of damage is this really scary, pun intended, lifting the veil. It's an ability in the shooting phase, not an attack. It's an ability, so she can run and still do this. And in the shooting phase, you pick an enemy unit within 12 inches, and you roll a dice. And if that dice is 2 or higher, you deal that many mortal wounds to the enemy. So it's basically like doing d6 mortal wounds. And if the target's terrified, it's +1 mortal wound, which, in the shooting phase, you might not be terrifying enemies because you have to be within 3 inches or 6 if you use that one artifact. And if this slays any models, she heals D3. And with her ridiculous effective health, that D3 is actually more like healing 3D3. And there's ways to get her in range with this ability immediately, because she can deploy herself in reserve and then just immediately be within 12, or she can use the Spectral Tether spell to just teleport herself in range. It's a very powerful, very scary ability. You got to pay attention to this one. She is a 2-spell wizard, unfortunately with no bonuses to cast, but she can cast her signature spell and then either Shade Mist or Seal of Shyish or Spectral Tether. Her signature spell is okay. It gives an enemy unit -1 to hit, and Nighthaunt units, when they fight or shoot that unit, they get +1 to hit. So it's kind of like a neat little reversal effect. And that lasts until your next hero phase, so you don't have to use all-out attack, or you can use it to get through -1 hit effects. It's fine. It's a longer range than most Nighthaunt spells, but it's a hard cast on a 7 that's not really reliable. So whatever. Odds are you're going to end up casting one of the 3 spells we talked about before.
So there's a bit of synergy that can work with her as well that you might see depending on what kind of updates might happen recently as well, just depending on certain situations with casting and spells and yada, yada, yada. But there is something to be said about the combo with her and a Black Coach. It is a pretty hefty point investment for the Nighthaunt player. But if you have her Spectral Tether in the in the hero phase to teleport 9 inches away, or maybe let's say 10 inches away from your Stormcast line, then at the start of the movement phase, the Black Coach also moves and becomes 9 inches away right next to her. Let's say you also deep strike some spirit hosts near her for added protection for Lady O herself. She lifts the veil. Let's say she kills 3-4 models. If she can kill 4 models with her mortal wounds, then that Black Coach is now gone from level 1 to level 5. So that Black Coach now has a 4-up ward, and depending on what happens in the start of the hero phase, start of the shooting phase as well, you can do her lift the veil and then immediately do the ranged attack, which can be a bit of a 1-2 punch. Black Coach's ability later.
We actually didn't include the Black Coach on our list because it's not really seeing play. So we can talk about it now because it is very relevant to Lady Olynder and Emerald Host and all that stuff. In our review of the book, we were so hot on the Black Coach when we first saw the War Scroll, and then we were like, how do you activate this ability? Because Alex, break down how the Black Coach works for people who may not be aware and why it works so well with Olynder.
So I'm not gonna lie, I went in the exact opposite direction as you guys with this. When I first did this book, I was very disappointed with the Black Coach. It used to be something that was incredibly synergistic, and it is just not anymore. And it is also, I think it went up like 125 points too.
It's pricey, yeah.
It's 10-inch move, 4-up save. It can have a variety of different weapons. You can either have a D3 attack, ranged damage to ranged attacks, very good, or it can be slightly better in combat. It's important to note that it is a behemoth that is not a monster, and it's got on the upwards of 19 to 21 attacks in combat, most of which are hitting on 4s. But it can, it's got a 5-up ward standing. It can move its 10 inches, or at the start of the movement phase, it can just teleport anywhere on the board outside of 9 inches of enemy units. But the thing that's really important is that it's formerly the rule that gave it a bunch of different buffs and debuffs. The Nimbus of Power is now very, very simple. When you start the game, for every Black Coach you have on the table, you put 1 dice besides the model, and that's its like power level. And so it's always at power level 1. For every enemy unit that dies within 12 inches of it, it goes up another power level to a maximum of 6. If its power level is at 5 or more, that means that like at least 4 models have died within 12 inches of it. It now has a standing 4-up ward. So, we talked about how hard it is to move Nighthaunt units off the objectives or whatever. Now you have, without having to spend a command ability, an innate passive 4-up save, ignoring rend, 4-up ward. It becomes really, really hard to move this unit. In addition to that, it could potentially lose that 4-up ward. And at the start of the shooting phase, you can pick one enemy model within 12 inches, or enemy unit within 12 inches of the Black Coach. And on a 2-up, it does 3d3 mortal wounds, and it goes back to level 1.
It's that mortal wound blast is the key. It's such a huge amount of damage in this faction, which we've talked about, doesn't really do a lot of mortal wounds. But if you lean into this style with Olynder, maybe a Black Coach, maybe 2, they're so expensive it's hard to fit more than 1. But Olynder and a Black Coach together can just blast something for D6 plus 3d3 mortal wounds. And then you throw a Torment Nexus on top of that, and the Emerald Host is the cherry on top. So this is a style that exists. We're not talking about it in depth today because Scarlet Doom's just everywhere. But definitely keep an eye out for Olynder and Black Coaches in the future. They're just a few point changes away, like 20 points off each one, and they become viable.
For sure. Totally agree.
Can't talk about Nighthaunt heroes without talking about Spirit Hosts. There's at least 1 unit in every list. They're battle line, so automatically they're in every list for that reason alone sometimes. They do god-awful damage, 6 damage at 4s and 4s per model. Doesn't matter. Irrelevant. They are veterans. They can contest Proving Grounds, which is great. However, as a veteran, they do take bonus damage from Bounty Hunters, if that is still relevant when this podcast goes live. But they're a support unit. They're not doing damage. What these guys do is they have a 3+ bodyguard, which means if a Nighthaunt hero around them takes damage, on a 3+, this unit takes the damage instead, which is what makes Nighthaunt heroes so durable, is that they can just effectively triple their effective health, because a 3+ bodyguard is insane. So how this ability works, and there's a bit of jank to it, but basically the hero, instead of making a ward or trying to negate it for some reason, rolls a dice, and on a 3+, the Spirit Host takes it. And when the Spirit Host takes it, they can't negate that. So effectively, you're giving up your ward on both the hero that used it and the Spirit Host itself. But then the Spirit Host takes the wound, and all is dandy. You can even start reviving them with Spirit Torment at the end of the turn. There's a bit of jank here that I want to mention. I don't know if this is going to get FAQ'd or if it's an oversight or whatever, but as it's written, this is technically how it works. The ability can only be used if a Spirit Host is within 3 inches of the hero that's taking the wound, but the wound can be allocated to any Spirit Host anywhere on the battlefield. So if for some reason you have a Spirit Host hiding in the corner, the hero that took the wound doesn't pass it off to the unit that's next to him. He can pass it off to the other side of the table. And that seems like an obvious thing that they should fix. Am I crazy? You guys have read this ability, right?
It's janky and it does work, but I mean, people usually don't use it that way just because, it
doesn't make sense.
Seems like the intent, would be for it to be going to the unit. But the specific wording that allows that is on a 3-up, that wound or mortal wound is allocated to a friendly unit with this ability instead of that hero and cannot be negated. So it doesn't specify that unit in reference to the unit that is within 3 inches of a hero. It is a friendly unit with this ability.
Yeah.
So it doesn't specify a distance. It doesn't specify the friendly unit that is within 3 inches of the friendly hero. So because it doesn't specify that, it can go to any unit with that ability, just because it is technically a friendly unit with that ability.
Yeah.
It is janky. It's how it's written.
I've never seen anyone play it. I've never seen anyone take advantage of it, but it technically exists. So I just want to warn people about it.
Yeah, it's just super niche, but you could watch out for it. Always look out for, fight jank with jank. Beware of the rules.
Classic GW rules writing.
Watertight.
Why no one, I don't think anyone would play it this way. There's not a single bodyguard rule in the game works this way.
Honestly, as a competitive player who plays Nighthaunt or has played Nighthaunt or regularly does off and on, this would cause too many arguments and judge.
Not worth it. Not worth it.
Not worth it.
Yeah. Slows the game down. It might cost you the game because you fall behind or something on time.
You're gonna be on your clock,
So the most important thing to talk about with Spirit Hosts is what is the best way to kill them. Should you kill the heroes or should you kill the Spirit Hosts? Because the Spirit Hosts on their own do nothing. They're not a priority target. Their damage is negligible. They can contest Proving Grounds, but like that, everything in Nighthaunt contests Proving Grounds, so that's not a big deal. They're not a priority target. The only reason you want to deal with them is because they protect the heroes, and the heroes are high priority targets. If you kill the heroes, this army starts to get picked apart. So what's better, kill the heroes or kill the Spirit Hosts? Well, if you're hitting the hero, they would have, if you're shooting them, they get Lookout Sir, but then they'll have a 4-up save and a 3+ bodyguard with no ward allowed. If you try hitting the Spirit Host, they'll have a 4+ save, they'll always have a 6+ ward, and then they can discorporate to get a 5+ ward. So it seems like the math favors just killing the heroes, which is precisely what you want to be doing anyway, because sometimes you just get lucky and the hero dies. They fail a bunch of bodyguard saves and then they're gone. And it also happens to be that the fastest way to get rid of the Spirit Host is actually by attacking the heroes that are near them and not attacking the Spirit Host directly. Because remember, Discorporate can only be received by a unit that's being attacked. If you attack the hero, they can Discorporate, but then they can't use the ward and the bodyguard at the same time. Whereas if you attack the Spirit Host, they can Discorporate and actually become more durable. So, quick tip on Nighthaunt is it seems unintuitive to kill the heroes through the bodyguard, but that is actually the correct way to do it.
The only thing that I would add to that for people to be aware of is that every single wound, the Nighthaunt player gets to decide what they're doing. So with 1 wound at a time allocation, they can choose to use their bodyguard or their 5-up ward until a certain point and then switch.
This is true.
That's correct. It is also worth noting that, because I've seen some people claim otherwise, but Spirit Host, the way you allocate wounds 1 at a time, like Jack just said, if you kill all the Spirit Hosts, like let's say your hero takes 20 damage and you allocate 9 to the Spirit Hosts and they're dead, you can't allocate any more to them. The remaining 11 damage has to go on the hero. Just to be clear about how that works.
Yeah.
Someone's tried that?
Wouldn't believe what I have to deal with sometimes.
Anyways, the best way, in case you're facing a Nighthaunt player and they're trying to kind of fast roll things, do try to remind them that the best way to do it is to roll whoever has the least amount of wounds at the time, whether it's the Spirit Host available or the hero available. If the hero has, his whole 6 wounds and there's only 5 wounds of Spirit Host left, you're going to need to roll 5 dice. If the hero only has 1 wound left, you got to go 1 at a time. So that is the best way, like best practice, if you will.
It's the only fair way. Any other way is skewing the statistics, and it's certainly not correct.
It can get really wonky.
When we're talking about strategies to beat a Nighthaunt player, you could actually, there's an argument to attacking the Spirit Hosts instead of the character.
Lay it out. I want to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you can, force, if you're playing against somebody who's very, very in tune with it, they're going to just be like, okay, cool, I'm not going to use Discorporate. But let's say worst case scenario, you do have them use Discorporate. Cool. They've just spent a command point and you shoot with let's say your first shots are with something that's not going to do too much damage. Like, okay, great. Now my shooting unit that will kick the crap out of them is just going to shoot at the character. You just wasted a command point.
Yeah.
And now your Discorporate is wasted.
Yep.
But there's another important point to note is that when you shoot directly at the character, usually it's going to be a unit of 3 minimum, or 2 units of 3 is something that if you're fighting against Lady O, it's going to be a ton of MSU Spirit Hosts, because if they're down to 1 model and T6 models come back to every unit on the game and on the table, it becomes incredibly helpful to just bring units back up to full strength very easily. But what you're going to probably, another point to note is that if there's at least 3 models or a unit of 3 near them, any sort of hero, they're going to be -1 to hit. So that's something to factor in. If it's long strikes shooting at them, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. But it's just another factor to
Lookout Sir is definitely accounted for.
Yeah, and I was gonna chime in on that, because once you said that, I actually I got lucky in my last game, my last GT, and I shot us Cruciator, and he died just because you missed all of his save rolls. But if you're not, high rolling the crap out of everything, I actually think it's better to shoot these Spirit Hosts. If you're running a unit of long strikes, so 6 long strikes, for example, just as a general thing. I know, we've been going 2x3 and such. But let's assume, you got Aether Wings or whatever, what have you. Basically, you're shooting at your good efficiency. If you're shooting at a target ethereal with a 6-up ward, you're only going to get 10 damage through. Actually, sorry, just ethereal, it's going to be 10 point some odd. but because if you're not taking a ward on either one, right, they cannot be negated. If you're only doing 10 damage through, that's 10 damage that's going to be allocated, between the Cruciator and the Spirit Hosts. That's going to leave some Spirit Hosts alive, and it's going to leave the Cruciator alive because it's going to be allocated in between. Whereas if you just shot that into the Spirit Hosts, and they discorporated even on a 5-up ward, it still doesn't average 9.33 damage, which will wipe that unit. If you leave part of the Spirit Host alive, they might revive it, for example. So I think, honestly, it's better just to take out the Spirit Hosts and then take out the Cruciator.
It depends on your damage profile. It depends on how many Spirit Hosts they have. Like, if they have 6 Spirit Hosts, yeah, that's tough, right?
You're not doing great. But with long strikes, specifically, so, from our perspective as far as, Stormcast, with long strikes, I would shoot a 1x3 Spirit Host list. I would shoot the Spirit Hosts, because it will wipe them on average, and then you can start, doing your job, playing the rest of the game.
Yeah, you're setting up your shooting for later turns.
Yes.
This is the perfect opportunity for, I mean, obviously you don't see dragons as much now, but like Dracoline and the Celestin Prime and, things that I can recall from my games where I'm like, those mother effers,
Well, we definitely got Dracolines on the list. Don't worry about that.
Oh,
They are a sleeper unit right now, Dracolines, and yes, 15 Judicators are as well on the
Next
list.
GHB, I'm calling it points down on Dracolines.
I hope so. Next up, the first hammer unit of the Nighthaunt army. So hammer units refer to units that are meant to do damage, as opposed to anvil units, which are meant to tie you down and slow you down and keep you in place. Hammer units are the main fighting force. And Nighthaunt are an army that hammer and anvil is kind of the same thing, because your hammer units can suddenly become very defensive and very hard to kill. But the first hammer unit here are the Grimghast Reapers. So each squad is 10 wounds on a 4-up save. Pretty much everything in this army is a 4-up save, so I'm going to stop talking about saves. These guys are always battle-lined, regardless of which sub-faction you pick, so that means they're always going to be veterans. They can always contest Proving Grounds and always take bonus damage from bounty hunters. They are the main, in a vacuum outside of Season 1, I'd say the main damaging unit for Nighthaunt because of their 2-inch range. Until they added this veteran thing that allows you to fight in 2 ranks, this was the only unit that could get all of the attacks with all the models reliably in combat. So they were the mainstay. So it's a good way to kind of examine the damage profiles of Nighthaunt, because we can extrapolate these guys into the other units. And they have good damage. Looking at them, 2 attacks at 4s and 3s rend 1 is not good. That's actually really bad. But the way you buff them up makes them good damage. So first up, you're pretty much always going to be at +1/+1 hit and wound because of the various things in the army. You've got All Out Attack and the Guardian of Souls to give you easy bonuses. Anytime this unit fights a unit with 5 or more models, which is pretty common these days.
Pretty much everybody.
Yeah, aside from heroes and monsters, it's pretty much everything these days. They get +1 attack, which is a big boost to their damage. They're also a good unit to put in bounty hunters, because you can chop through other ghosts a lot quicker that way. And you can get another +1 attack from the Light Shard. This unit will very often be reinforced or even double reinforced, because their 2-inch range, they want to take advantage of that, and they want to take advantage of the defensive aspects of Nighthaunt. And 30 wounds with a 4-up save and a 5-up ward, that's tough to chew through. That's 90 effective wounds, and most lists can't do, not most lists, but let's say there's a lot of lists in the game that will struggle to do 90 damage to this unit in a single turn before the Spirit Torment starts reviving them. I think personally this unit's best used in Grieving Legion, because you don't have to go with Scarlet Doom or Quicksilver Dead, and in Grieving Legion they can prevent enemies from retreating, which means you can take advantage of their super high durability when they're double reinforced, and because enemies can't retreat and they just sit there and fight you the whole game, and that's how the game is played. There is a serious downside to these guys, though. The fact that they only get a bonus attack when they're fighting 5+ models kind of limits their damage output against Gargants or really elite monster lists and things like that. And the fact that they're a 4+ hit means the best they can ever do is a 3+. And if you hit them with enough -1 hit effects, they go to a 5-up, which if you happen to be listening to this and you've played Tau in 40k, you know how much it sucks to hit on 5s.
Yeah. Hits are not a linear progression. It's exponential, and it starts to get real bad at 5-up.
Even on 3-up, it's swingy, right? That's one of the big downsides of Grimghast Reapers, but they roll so many dice that it averages out to something nice, and every hit roll of 6 is an auto wound, which does help as well.
Not gonna lie, I don't think you're gonna see you're gonna have to worry too much about them as Stormcast players, anyways. Just because, like, if you do have troops, it's usually going to be, or at least your bubble wrap, that's going to be hitting the Grimghast first. It's probably going to be a 5-man unit, and if it's gotten hurt at all, then you're just not getting the extra attack against that Stormcast unit. Your big characters that are big and scary, you're also just not going to have to worry about mass amounts of Grimghast Reapers, attacks or anything like that.
Mhm.
In addition to that, they are 160 points for 10. So,
Yeah.
like you guys mentioned at the start of this episode, Nighthaunt units do have a premium to them because of the allegiance abilities and other things. But like coming from another death army, I look at them and then I look at my 140 point Graveguard that like a unit of 20 will kill almost everything in the game, and make their points back. And then I look at this unit and go, oh, okay, well, that's battle line, but it's very pricey battle line. So
Mhm.
usually if you fight it, if you're seeing a list and you're fighting against a Nighthaunt person, they're generally not going to have this unit. They're usually going to have Chain Rasps or whatever their subfaction unlockable is.
Yeah, chain rasps are a cheaper, easier screen. The 5-up save on chain rasp does suck, but it's just a screen.
Yeah.
You don't care, right? You need screens
Mhm.
in this game. You can't just play with all hammers, no anvils. But
Yeah.
when it comes time to do damage, if you're not playing Scarlet Doom and if you're not playing Quicksilver Dead, you're going to use these guys to do your damage. Or maybe Olynder and Black Coaches like we talked about. But let's not have no memes, okay? Just real units for now. Yeah, so this is the baseline, and this is a good starting point to talk about our next unit, the Bladegheist Revenants. Again, they're also 10 wounds. They cost about 10% more, so they're 175 instead of 160 like the Reapers, and they are a super popular pick right now because Scarlet Doom makes them battle line, which makes them veterans, which makes them fight in 2 ranks, which fixes their core problem. Looking over their damage profile, in red I've highlighted what makes them different to Grimghast Reapers. So pretty much the same thing. They get all the same buffs. They get the same defensive and offensive buffs. They hit on 3s instead of 4s, so right away it's like having all-out attack, which stacks with another all-out attack, so they can get on 2s. Instead of getting +1 attack if they're fighting 5 or more models, they get +1 attack if they charged, which as Nighthaunt, you will always be charging on your turn because you can always retreat and charge. There's nothing, well, aside from the Kron spawn, there's nothing that can stop you from doing that. Now, the Grimghast, I will say a point in their favor is that they don't need to charge to get a damage bonus, which means if they're fighting defensively, they can continue chopping through hordes, whereas Bladegheist start to suffer fighting defensively. That's one of their main weaknesses, is that when they get charged, when you're fighting on your opponent's turn, they're not doing a lot of damage, so all your damage has to come on your turn, which is fine because when you're Scarlet Doom, after charging, you deal a whole bunch of mortal wounds. So
Unless you get double turned, that's a problem.
unless you get double turned, yeah. But then the Nighthaunt can double turn, and they just do a lot of damage on theirs. So, yep, it's balanced. It's fine. The game's balanced. It's good. Their main limitation is their 1-inch range. 32 mil bases, 10 models. Automatically, you're stuck with problems with cohesion, but Galatian Veteran fixes that. You can fight in 2 ranks, so there's virtually no downside to this unit except slightly higher point cost.
So I have to wonder, because was this book designed with that double fighting in mind, knowing we'd be going into this season, or did they expect the book to be just as good? Because right now Nighthaunt is really, really, really good. How bad are we talking if they lose that 2-inch or like 2-rank fighting thing, Alex?
You wouldn't see this unit. I mean, you would,
No.
but it'd be MSU to.
You mean
get
over Reapers
mortal
or
wound.
Grimghast Reapers?
No, at that point, I would just, to be honest, I would just go super, like, there's a good list out there. There's a guy, I guarantee he's higher up in the ITC as well. A guy in Southern California named Kyle, and I've actually fought against his Nighthaunt in a mirror match before, but he plays a very particular hero hammer style, a ton of spirit hosts, in addition to an allied corpse cart and like the heroes. Like, he doesn't bring Reikenor, but he brings like the ethereal steed with the mortal wound ability we talked about earlier, Lady O, and Kurdos, and Kurdos hits like a brick shithouse.
Doesn't he hit like the Celestin Prime?
Yes.
Yeah, he has
Better.
Galmarad
Oh no,
for
yeah,
no reason.
he's
got
got
a-
Galmarad
yeah.
for no reason.
Round
You
2,
said-
Galmaraz.
That's what the pivot would be.
Well, I mean, like, that would be the pivot for sure. If there was no, then just a ton of spirit hosts, maybe 2 units of 10 or 2 units of 20 chain rasps and expert conquerors, and then you got a tanky whatever screened out, thing that's going to be able to take hits at -1 to wound because of the corpse guard, -1 casting near them too because of the corpse guard, and you don't want to do command abilities near them either. So you can do this like little mobile threat station at -1 damage too.
So you don't think the pivot could be Grimghast Reapers?
I think Grimghast need to go down in points. It's just that's also very much
160. Yeah.
The problem is they used to be 120 when the book first came out, the first one, and so you'd see them everywhere. And Games Workshop, there's a unit that's really, really good, and then they nerf it or they increase its points. They unless it's got pointy ears, like Jack mentioned earlier, they don't forget. I don't forget.
Evocators, rip.
Yeah,
exactly. Evocators, Sequitors.
Yeah. Oh god.
Well, we nerfed it, so we can just stop thinking about it forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so the last hammer unit is the Dreadscythe Harridans, which we were talking a little bit about earlier. They're also 10 wounds, 4 up save, so a lot of these units are very similar, very comparable. They're only Quicksilver Dead battle line, which means the only time you're pretty much going to see them is in the Quicksilver Dead because veterans are the hotness right now. They are seeing some play because Nurgle and Nighthaunt are popular, and disabling those 5-up boards is really good, but they're not nearly as popular as Scarlet Doom. Looking at their damage profile, they start at 4 attacks, so right off the bat they're at 4, which is higher than the max 3 that these other units can get, and they're always at 4. There's no condition for having bonus attacks here. However, they're on 4s and 4s with an Rend, which is a terrible profile. Even if you get +1/+1, you got to start adding Rend 2, Rend 3. You need a lot of support to make these girls good. Now, you can also go Bounty Hunters for +1 damage, and suddenly you're looking at max 8 damage per model, which is terrifying in a unit of 10 models, 20 models, 30 models. Max 8 per dude is huge. You can also get +1 attack from Light Shard, putting you up to a max 10 damage per model, and then you're ignoring wards. So, this unit can slap, but it's a lot of work to set it up, and it's just not as efficient as just mortal wounding something to death with Scarlet Doom. It also has this neat ability where if you charged, enemies within 3 inches have -1 to wound, which is cool. That also works on Unleash Hell, by the way, because that's not just in the combat phase, I believe. If you want to double check that, somebody real quick.
Yeah, it's good. It works.
Pretty sure I've had that used against me. But with 4s and 4s, they're really weak to -1 hit and -1 wound effects. Mostly -1 hit effects, because -1 wound, sometimes they'll just they'll get hit rolls of 6 and that'll auto wound. But reducing their hit rolls is brutal against this unit. That's one of the downsides. And they are, just like Bladegheist Revenants, limited by 1-inch range, but since they're veterans, they can fight in 2 ranks now. If you want to keep your units safe from either of these guys, just put them more than 4 inches away from your front line, because assuming they don't have the charge distance to jump their whole unit over your screen, if you're more than 4 inches away, they can't reach you, because even if they kill the unit that they were fighting, they can still pile in 3 inches and then fight 1 inch. So if you're 4.1 inches out, you're safe from these melee units.
Yeah, it's a good unit.
Alex, you talked about Hexwraiths before. I'll let you take this slide, man, because you seem to really understand what makes Hexwraiths good, and I want to hear it from somebody who is excited about it.
Well, Hexwraiths are actually something that I was not excited about when the book first came out. I had actually sold them off to a buddy of mine just to realize I needed to buy 10 more very quickly. But yeah, they are just as many points as a Grimghast Reaper, which is not great point for point. You're looking at 16 points a wound, so 32 points a model. Not very exciting on the Nighthaunt players side of things, but the utility that they have against an opponent can be very helpful. They're not really that great in combat, with 2 attacks, 3 3s, 1 rend, 1 damage, and 2 attacks, force 4s, or force 5s. No, it's force 4s, no rend, 1 damage. But they do, no matter how many guys are in the unit, just like Black Knights and Soulblight Gravelords, if they complete a charge on a 2-up, once they do so, an enemy unit with an edge takes D3 mortal wounds. Mm-hmm. That's automatic. There could be one guy with 1 wound left. That could be a unit of 5. Does not matter. It's going to be D3 mortal wounds on a 2-up. That's pretty helpful. In addition to that, rather than they kind of, in this book, they've combined a bunch of rules that they used to have and made 3 rules into 1, like they did with with Ethereal and things like that. They did the same thing with this unit. So they used to be able to fly over things and do wounds. They don't do that anymore, and they used to be able to like be really fast. They don't do that anymore. Instead, all they do is when you advance, instead of advancing at the start of the hero phase or start of the movement phase, you can choose to Phantasmal Advance, which means that you double their move characteristic and you can't charge. You can still advance and do a Phantasmal Advance as well. It's not considered an. It just means you declare this at the start of the phase if you choose to move in this fashion, and you double their move characteristic. So you can move, anywhere between 25 to 30 inches with this unit all of a sudden, and it can be just wherever it needs to be with their cavalry bases. It's really, really easy to block off enemy units. I have ruined. No, I wouldn't say given an NPE, but like if there's impassable and garrisons nearby, and let's say you're playing against, Beastclaw Raiders or Kragnos or a bunch of stuff that doesn't have fly, Stormcast included, especially back when the Deep Strike Stormcast wasn't as common. You could block off areas and zones of the map, where objectives are, and all of a sudden, like, sure, the Hexwraiths might die, but like I am now preventing your units from being in this part of the table for at least 1 or 2 turns.
Yeah, they're a phenomenal tactical piece.
Yes.
And that's, if Nighthaunt were just a little bit cheaper, you'd see 2 units of this in every list.
Oh yeah, hands down my favorite unit in the book, hands down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's 3 main uses that I see for this unit, and we talked about this even during our review. The first one is like you said, just blocking movement. You move 25 to 30 inches, you can guarantee one of them will run 6, so you can just have a 30-inch move right off the bat. You block somebody in their deployment. If you have multiple units of these guys, you just surround the whole army. If they don't fly, if they don't teleport, if they can't punch, even if they punch their way through it, they've wasted a turn. So that's really good for tactical play. Another use of these guys that I think we talked about as well was spamming that D3 mortal wounds. So like if you have 2 of these guys, you can do some serious ping mortal wounds. If you lean into that Olynder, Black Coach, Emerald Host thing, these guys actually fit into that really well, because that D3 mortal wounds, they don't have to fight to do that. That's just something that happens passively in the charge phase while they're also stacking up Wave of Terror. So that's a nice use for them. And the third main use is really sneaky stealing objectives. You charge into stuff 1 turn, they're not a high priority target, your opponent's probably not going to kill them unless they really need to, or you just happen to charge the wrong thing. And then on your turn, you're like, 24-inch retreat. See ya, I have whatever objective I want on the board. There's nothing you can do to stop me.
So the tricky thing with that is coming, if you're not a Nighthaunt player, listeners here won't be, with that type of rule, it's called Phantasmal Advance, but it is not an advance, like I mentioned earlier. So like they can do this 24-inch retreat with Phantasmal Advance onto objectives. So yeah, just be aware of that.
To clarify, you keep saying advance because you play 40k, and every 40k player says advance. It's a run. We call it a run here.
Yeah,
because people might get confused.
You did catch me. Yeah, you caught me in that one.
Yeah, it does work on retreating. You can't run and retreat at the same time, of course. So it would just be a 24. It wouldn't be a 24 plus d6. But man, 24-inch flying retreat will steal anything from if they're not paying attention. It's really, really sneaky.
Yeah.
Another support unit that Nighthaunt like to use, and more than I thought they would, but I think part of that is because the Endless Spells got updated and they're now a real threat. But they are the Myrnmourn Banshees. So they are fragile. Well, they're only 4 wounds. They're 1 wound apiece, so they die pretty easy. But these guys are not, even though they have decent melee weapons, they're not brought for their damage. They are brought for their anti-magic. And they are, because the rest of Nighthaunt is not very good at getting rid of magic. And magic messes this army up because you can't discorporate in the hero phase. So offensive spells really suck. Defensive spells really suck. But at least you can deal with offensive spells with the Banshees. So they have 4 damage a model on 4s, 3s, Ren 2, which is pretty good, honestly, but since it's only 4 models and they don't double reinforce, and there's other units that are better to buff with spells and stuff, so like you don't buff these girls to do damage, they can still swing high and do like 16 per squad, which is, whatever, keep an eye out for that. But their main use is their ability Spell Eater, which is used after normal casting and unbinding. So how it works is your opponent casts a spell, you have a chance to unbind it, then if they target a unit that's wholly within 12 inches of the Banshees, you can try to unbind it, in air quotes, and basically you just try to roll over the cast value of the spell. You also have +1 to do this. So let's say your opponent casts a spell on a 6, and you fail the unbind. They cast it with like a 10 or something crazy, like a 12. You fail the unbind, and then they target a unit that's wholly within 12 inches of the Banshees, and you say, okay, well, I'll roll cast value 6. I need to roll a 6 on the dice because I get +1. Oh, the spell's gone because I rolled a 6. It works like that. It's really, really powerful when it does work. This also works against endless spells. If an endless spell comes up and hits one of your units wholly within 12 of the Banshees, you can immediately try to dispel it by rolling over the cast value of that spell. Not the casting roll, the cast value. Now, there are some serious downsides and limitations to this ability that people should be aware of. First off, it doesn't work on anything that doesn't target the unit. If it doesn't say pick a unit, it doesn't work. So if you have a spell that does mortal wounds in an area around the Banshees, this ability doesn't work on that. If it's a defensive spell they cast on their own units and you're near the Banshees, nope, doesn't work on them. It only works when they cast offensive spells on your units. And it only dispels an endless spell when it finishes a move within 6 inches of the unit. So if you have a spell that kind of passes over you and then lands outside that 6 inches, again, this ability does nothing. And because they're so easy to kill, it's like, if there's actually a spell you're trying to stop, you're probably just going to kill the Banshees first and then go and do it. And they're not the kind of unit, like Nighthaunt are really expensive. They can't really be spending 2 squads of these girls to bring them in. It's just, they're expensive, but they're good at what they do. But what they do is situational. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of going around in circles here. What do you guys think of these girls?
I think that their rules are super cool. But given the point values of the Nighthaunt army, you don't see them very much.
I think they're very meta dependent. I think if Seraphon and Tzeentch really just start to take over the meta, you're going to see more and more of these guys. But otherwise, like Stormcast, Ironjaws, and like Beasts of Chaos are dominating. Yeah, I don't think Myrmmourn really matters.
Yeah, I sleep on them super hard. I've even I had a situation where I played against one on day 2. You know, the other Nighthaunt player and I were undefeated, and I was like, cool, I get to finally interact with Myrnmourn Banshees, and like, it's super easy to get them out of range of an endless spell, you know, especially since you're the one moving it. It's just not like a good combo, and they're just there. And for context, you know, he mentioned how expensive they are. Yeah, they're 4 models, and they're 105 points for 1 wound each. So like, I know that this is a fool's errand in a game, in an RNG game that is Warhammer, but especially Nighthaunt. You know, I like to always think of like how many wounds, how many points per model, how many wounds per model, and like, you just throw that entire philosophy out the door with this unit.
Yeah, they're a support unit, but they're only useful sometimes, whereas a support unit like Hexwraiths all the time useful. And they contribute meaningful damage in the way that they're being useful. Whereas these sometimes useful, they have to stay. The wholly within 12 is a big limitation as well. It's really easy for Nighthaunt units to just charge and pile in out of range of this aura, and that sucks. So I just wanted to put them in here because their effect is so good. When it all lines up, it's really good, and you need to know how to play against this unit, but it's not very popular, and there's a reason why, because it's really limited in a lot of ways.
I mean, this could mean that this episode might have some, you might have some longer age in terms of relevance. Rules change in this game, and you know, especially coming from a podcast myself, you know, 6 months later, you know, whatever I've talked about generally doesn't really stand. But between like Lumineth and Tzeentch and any sort of battle scroll updates, it could very well likely be that you might end up seeing a little bit more of this. Not to say that, you know, a lot of you might be playing caster heavy armies, but yeah, no, I agree, it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, we try to make our content as evergreen as possible so people can come back to it for, you know, there's always going to be a timestamp of context whenever we record these, but we try to make it as useful as possible for as long as we can.
Heck yeah.
So miscellaneous units. These are units you might see, probably not, but you know, they pop up every now and then, or they don't have enough going on that it's not really worth going in depth on them. So the first one here is Chainghast. This is a squad of 2 models. All they do is they give a +1 hit aura around them. They're only 4 wounds, so if you really want to get rid of that +1 hit aura, you can just kill them. And this ability only works if the Spirit Torment is on the battlefield. So if he's in reserve for some reason, or if you just kill the Spirit Torment, they shut down as well. That's it. That's all there is to say about Chainghast. Like, their damage is whatever. They shoot, but it's not that good. Chain Rasp are a cheap veteran screen, so you'll see them probably the most out of every unit on this list. You'll see Chain Rasp just because they are a cheap veteran screen. However, for some reason, their damage is way worse than it was in 2nd edition, and they are a 5-up save, which is the worst of the whole army, so they're the easiest thing to kill, and they do the lowest damage. The only thing they have going for them is that they're a cheap battle line screen. 10
They're
models.
also the lowest bravery in the entire Grand Alliance.
Yes, they are I think the only death unit that's not bravery 10, which is super weird, but whatever.
Yep.
The Tomb Banshee, this is a really interesting one, and Alex, I'd like to know your thoughts after I explain what this model does for our viewers, because I really like this unit. I think this is one of the best War Scrolls in the army, and it's perplexing to me why it's not being used, so maybe you can enlighten me on that. So her ability is she increases the cost of command points on a unit by 1. So that effectively shuts down command points, because suddenly an all-out defense costing 2 command points or a rally costing 2 command points, these things are suddenly like really expensive for your opponent or just not worth doing at all. You can't, stop Unleash Hell because it happens in the charge phase. And how the effect applies is you pick one unit at the end of the charge phase within 12 inches, and on a 4+, this effect goes off. And you get +1 if the unit's terrified, which if you're playing Nighthaunt, you're within 12 inches, you'll have another unit that charged at least. So this is basically Roar, which this army doesn't have. They don't have any monsters, and in this season, we don't have the ability to turn heroes into monsters. However, unlike a Roar, this lasts until your next hero phase. So if you slap this on a unit, it's going to pay 2 points to rally. It's going to pay 2 points to use like a Marathi double tap, for example. It's going to spend 2 command points to all-out defense and shooting, all-out defense in combat, run 6, reroll charges. This effectively shuts down commands on a unit. And I really like this ability. I think it offers Nighthaunt something they don't have normally. So why is this unit not seeing play?
There's a lot of different reasons. First of all, 4-up, which is just essentially going to be a 3-up usually anyway. That's still a 33% chance that you're going to fail this. And she's in that. So the Banshee is in that magical little Goldilocks zone of being the exact same point cost as other really, really helpful heroes. It's the exact same point cost as a Spirit Torment and a Karen Wraith. And arguably, you could bring a Karen Wraith so the Banshee and the Karen Wraith used to always be 4 wounds. They're both models on 25 mil bases rather than 32 or 40, which is more common the rest of the army's heroes, at least non-named heroes. So the cool thing about the Banshee is that you can fit it in big groups of units that it normally a hero wouldn't be able to fit in because of the smaller size. But again, if I'm going some matchups, I might really enjoy the Karen Wraith a little more because it's got as many attacks as enemy units within 3 inches. Even if it's something with Stormcast, it's not going to be a horde army. You could throw it in, and it's got all of a sudden it can easily have 5, 6, 7, 8 attacks. All out attack. All of a sudden, it's 2s and potentially 2s or 3s to wound, 1 rend, 2 damage with just a ton of attacks. Just I think of these other units that or the Spirit Torment. And these are consistent that don't require that 3-up roll. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So
that's what I was going to say.
I was thinking it's something like it's a 4th string hero in an army that doesn't bring 4 heroes. It'll bring 3 heroes, and if it's going to bring a 4th one, it might be a copy of one of the original 3, and it just doesn't make the cut. Whereas it has a good effect, but it's just not good enough because, again, this army is expensive, and when you're you got to bring the bodies, so this hero just doesn't make it. Something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think if the Tomb Banshee's effect went off and was passive, you would see this show up in lists.
Oh, this would be the best ally in the game. Every list of every Death Army would use this 2+ Roar, just guaranteed Roar all the time. No way, it's so good. But yeah, it's such a strong ability. I really like it. So the Dreadblade Harrow. This is a super weird War Scroll. We had a really hard time judging whether or not it would be used because the effect is really good. Effectively, when you're Nighthaunt General, it used to be any general, and that was crazy. It worked as an ally, which is stupid.
That was dumb.
But now it's only Nighthaunt Generals, and that includes Olynder, even if she's not your general, because she's a War Master. She's always a general. When they use a command ability, once per round, this Dreadblade Harrow can copy that command for free, which means you can have 2 Discorporates instead of just 1. You can have 2 rallies instead of 1. You can have 2 Inspiring Presence. You can have 2 all-rack teleports. And this stacks with himself, so you can have multiple Dreadblade Harrows. And in addition to that, he has this nifty ability to just teleport himself every turn. So you can just take an empty objective anytime you want. No cast roll, no prayer roll, nothing. You just, boop, he's over there. It's his now. How come he's not more common?
Same issue as the Banshee.
Yeah.
Exact same issue as the Banshee. 100%. It's too many things.
What do you think would
Like,
make him
yeah.
playable?
Like an internal balance issue,
Making the other heroes more expensive.
yeah.
Or making them worse. Honestly, like one of the first things you said in this episode when you started going into just like the war scrolls was that Nighthaunt has some of the best support heroes in the game, and this is the issue: is that like if they're all like razor thin margin and differences between how useful they are in the army, the one that's going to be like a slight edge more useful is going to be the one that's taken, and so everything is like a split shot of like, is this slightly better in any capacity? And so like some lists might end up finding the Dreadblade Harrow more useful, but right now with the whip missions and the way the game is, it's just like the Tomb Banshees. Like there's just more useful options.
Do you think he'd see play if Olynder starts seeing play, or Nagash even, because he's a War Master as well? Or is it like just an all rack the Drowner kind of thing, or just for double Discorporates? Like what kind of list would even want to use this guy instead of another unit? Let's say you give up a unit of 10 Grimghast Reapers to bring this guy.
Grieving Legion, no named characters, and a bunch of bodies. So you can bring like an ethereal steed issuing like Discorporate, and then all of a sudden your 60 chain refs that you have in your list are also getting Discorporate.
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Just for that phase, though, so you better hope they're not hitting you in shooting and combat.
Yeah.
Or they don't hit you with a roar. Oh boy, that's a rough one.
Yeah, the roar would be rough.
All right, Allrack the Drowner. We were really hyped about this guy. I think he would have seen play if the meta didn't forcefully shift to Scarlet Doom. This guy and Grieving Legion that's a powerhouse combo. And that style, I think that style is definitely going to see play as soon as we leave this meta.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Yeah, he has as many points as 10 Bladegheist Revenants, which, yes, you are right. Like the fact that Bladegheist Scarlet Doom is so useful, that's why you're not seeing him. In addition to that, he's just very expensive for what he does, in my opinion. So if you drop down to like 150 points or 160 points, you would see him a ton more, even though that's like, 20 points less.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, to be clear, because I didn't explain what he does. So what makes Allrack useful is he has a command ability, which allows him to teleport himself and any Nighthaunt unit that he can see anywhere more than 9 inches from an enemy. And this can be done in addition to the 3 units that you drop in Vanishing Phantasms, and you can copy this ability with Dreadblade Harrows. So there's definitely a playstyle where you just take your whole army and you put it on your enemy's doorstep and you say, good luck killing me. You're stuck in your deployment until you do. How many turns is it going to take you? I don't know. Let's find out. That's the game you're playing. You're not playing Age of Sigmar at that point anymore. You're playing a different game, just trying to annoy your opponent.
You're playing Pen and Win. That's basically it.
You're playing Nurgle. Yeah.
I literally used to play
or
in
dragons.
the previous book.
Dragons, yeah.
And that's why I hope that we don't go to that, because I think what we're seeing is the pin and win strategy. Not only is it not fun to play against, but it also becomes one of the first things GW looks at to nerf.
Yes.
If any army in the game is going to do that, I hope it's Nighthaunt. That style, I mean, because it makes sense. They're teleporting ghosts. They attack from all angles unexpectedly. It doesn't make sense for Nurgle to be that fast. It doesn't make sense for Stormcast to be that fast. But Nighthaunt fits perfectly. That all of a sudden ghosts, that fits perfectly.
Yep. Really strong to do that and just teleport onto the objectives, especially if you're going to be doing the tanky build. Just teleport on the objectives and stand there for 4 turns.
Yeah. That can work, yeah. You can just body people off objectives. They can't kill you fast enough. Hopefully.
Yep.
Hopefully. The last miscellaneous unit we put on this list, and you guys can add some as well if you want to after this, is Krulghast Valentian. So he has 2 main things. First off, he hits like Celestant Prime, which is nuts. 5 attacks, 3s, rend 3 damage. Like that's Galmaraz on round 2. It's not attached to a guaranteed deep strike charge, but that's still a lot of damage for a single model.
He's also got 6 attacks at round 1 also.
Yeah, and those shouldn't be ignored because Frightful Touch can make him. He hits better than Celestant Prime. Just rub it in, why don't you? His main jank and why a lot of people are excited about him is that he doesn't just stop enemies from using commands like a Tomb Banshee or Olynder. He actually just takes command points. It's like, hey, that's a nice command point. It's mine. Thank you. On a 5+. 4+ if he's near an enemy hero. There's a specific range that I didn't bother recording because nobody uses Krulghast right now for that purpose. It's not common.
It's also the start of the battle round too.
Yeah, it's when people generate command points, that's when
Yeah.
he steals them. So getting in range of an enemy hero is not very likely. So just assume it's going to be a 5-up. And that only works if he's on the battlefield, right? So if he's in reserve, he's trying to do deep strike charge shenanigans, that ability's not going to activate in that first round. But yeah, he's a fun little piece to use. He's a really useful ally, I think, being able to steal command points and hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
Are there any other units we want to mention here before we move into overall strengths and weaknesses?
I definitely want to bring up the final named character. Especially in my region, Nighthaunt players, it's pretty common, and even myself, to use Reikenor, especially in the previous book, but he still has legs right now. There aren't a lot of casters in the Nighthaunt book. Like we talked about, the Guardian of Souls, Master of Magic plus Arcane Tome. Those are usually and sometimes Lady O. Those are the only casters you're going to see. But there's also Reikenor, and he shouldn't be. And you should always prepare to potentially see him as well, since he's got some juicy rules that can be useful against a Stormcast player. First of all, he has a 14-inch move. He's every single named character, just for consistency's sake. Every named character you're going to encounter at Nighthaunt, as long as it's going to have 7 wounds with its 4-up save, and usually a 6-up ward besides Lady O. So, Reikenor's got a 14-inch move in a world of 8 for the other named characters. He's got a special ability called the Corpse Candles. So he's a level 1 caster, which isn't great, but before he casts a spell, he can pick an enemy unit within 12 inches, and before he rolls the casting dice, do 1 mortal wound to an enemy unit within 12, and then be +1 to cast, or do 1 mortal wound to himself, roll the ward, regardless of which he suffered the wound was initially taken, and then he is +3 to cast. So if you don't have the Midnight Tome, or if you've already used the Midnight Tome and your opponents, or if they've used the Midnight Tome and you've already, say, unbound Purple Sun, well, all of a sudden, Reikenor's on the table, do a mortal wound to himself, and then be +3 to cast the Purple Sun. So it's a pretty consistent caster for endless spells, with that +3 to cast. And then also he's got, just negligible mount attacks, but he's still got 5 attacks in combat at 2-inch range, 3/3, 2 rend, 2 damage, +1 to hit and wound against priests and wizards. So the last thing you should have it in combat with.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a name. He's got a name spell as well. I mean, his signature spell too, but it's scary against Stormcast, but it's something to be aware of.
Let's put all the pieces together. So Nighthaunt strengths, they can put 3 units in reserve after deployment, which can really mess with your opponent. They don't know what you're going to put in reserve until it's too late. Every single unit in the army ignores Rend, which makes them very strong against armies that rely on Rend, like Ironjaws and Stormcast. They can charge past screens with their tiny flying footprint units. Every unit can retreat and charge, making them a very difficult army to pin down. Kronspine might be the only way to do it currently, and we'll see if the Kronspine survives the battle scroll. Flying, retreat, and charge is incredibly disruptive. It's unpredictable. It is, outside of damage, it's some of the best utility in the game, being able to just do whatever you want, whenever you want. Really powerful. They have super high effective health when you stack everything properly. 30, like we've been mentioning a few times, 30 ghosts with a 4-up, 5-up ward, and that's 90 wounds, and then you can add on Shade Mist, you can add on other effects. It is pretty crazy. They can be really hard to kill. They have frequent and reliable revival at every turn. They don't roll for it. It happens, guaranteed. It's really strong. The Cruciator Aura and Discorporate don't need a hero phase, which means if you're letting your opponent go first and you're getting attacked, well, those abilities activate even if you haven't had a turn yet. A lot of armies are weak defensively on the top of round 1. They have to have a hero phase or even a combat phase in order to activate certain effects. The major defensive abilities of Nighthaunt do not need that, so you can take a hit and then get right back to fighting. And of course, it has to be mentioned, they can autocast any endless spell with Midnight Tome, usually the Purple Sun, but maybe something else in the future as well. Are there any other major strengths, outside of seasonal abilities, that we could add on to this list?
I mean, some easy battle tactics and stuff like that to be aware of, but You know.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's not much you can do to stop battle tactics in the game right now. There's too many to learn them all, and there's not much you can do to stop them, so it's not worth learning them, frankly.
Yeah.
It's more so it's something your opponent's doing. Okay, they're going to do that. I'm not going to worry about it. It's too much.
Mhm.
In terms of seasonal advantages, Season 1, the Galate region is very good for Nighthaunt. It almost is made for them in particular. There's no battle plans that require scoring with hero units. You can get by with just weak supporting heroes that don't ever need to fight anything. Previous seasons have always included at least one battle plan that required a leader to score objectives, or a hero, or a monster, or behemoth. Nighthaunt got none of those, and they don't have to deal with it in this season. It's fantastic. They have
Hold on. Nighthaunt have a behemoth.
the Black Coach. You're right.
A monster. A monster.
The
Okay.
monster that everybody. Oh, they have a Morngol, yeah.
Yeah, they got
They
the
got the
Morgul.
Morngol.
Morngol, yeah.
And
he's sick.
Nagash if you
Or the Incarnate.
If you're using Nagash and Nighthaunt, you're not really playing Nighthaunt. You're playing Nagash featuring Nighthaunt.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
They have many excellent veteran units. Every battle line unit becomes a veteran in this army. Spirit Hosts can contest Proving Grounds while keeping your heroes alive. Bladegheist Revenants can kill units protecting Proving Grounds and steal them in the same turn. If you're using Harridans or if you're using Grimghast Reapers, they do the same. Chain Rasps are doing it. All their excellent units are veterans. And unlike other armies, the Bounty Hunter Battalion is negated by the Cruciator aura. So +1 damage, meet -1 damage. It's basically wiped out against Nighthaunt.
Mm-hmm.
Their veteran units are simultaneously hammers and anvils at the same time, which is incredibly good. Stormcast have this with units like the Stormdrake Guard. We can make them super tanky, and they also deal good damage at the same time, and that kind of tactical flexibility is a very useful thing, and Nighthaunt just have a whole bunch of units with that. It's really good. The main thing that's working for them this season is that the veteran units can fight in 2 ranks, which has propped up Revenants and Harridans into previously unknown levels of power. I don't think Bladegheist Revenants have ever been this useful before. They are fantastic. And the Purple Sun was updated. It's really good, and it doesn't affect you. So not only when you use it, but if you're playing against somebody else that has a Purple Sun, it just really doesn't impact you. Losing one model on a roll of a 1 is not a big deal. People probably won't even cast the Purple Sun just in case it goes back in their own face. So you're immune to Purple Sun. That's one of your Allegiance abilities. Looking at the Nighthaunt game plan, how they approach a battle, they prefer to favor aggressive deployments because of their 8-inch move. They want to be as close to the front line as possible. And they're also quite durable, so they can handle enemies attacking them. Of course, that always changes if you're playing against a really aggressive army. You can force them to go first, and you deploy far back. But in general, I'd say Nighthaunt prefer an aggressive deployment. Because they can pull units off the table and drop them in anywhere, this deployment can immediately shift into a defensive deployment. You can put up 3 units as bait at the front, make your opponent think that you're going to go first and be aggressive, and then all of a sudden they force you to go first and pull their units off the table and say, okay, come and get me.
Yep.
With that same
Very
with that reserve deployment, they can also gamble from 9-inch charges. We looked at the odds earlier. A 9-inch rerollable is like a 48%. It's like a coin flip, and they can gamble for those. And unfortunately, this strategy also requires getting your support heroes up there. So it's not as simple as just here's 3 units of 30 Bladegheist attacking you all at the same time. Without those support heroes, you're not going to get very far with that. If the charge fails, well, you still block your opponent in their movement, and there's territory. That's not a bad thing to do. They have to come to you, they have to fight you, and with your durability, you can survive and then counterattack on your turn. However, this strategy always leaves these units vulnerable to counterattacks. If you're not in range of a Cruciator and a Guardian of Souls and a Spirit Torment, you're not fighting at peak efficiency with Nighthaunt, and because their units are so expensive, you kind of have to be as efficient as possible. So that's why they prefer this kind of Death Star style. The whole army fights more or less as one, with small little orbiting units controlling objectives and holding flanks. The Hammer units want to stay close to the support units, the Cruciators, Spirit Torments, and Guardian of Souls, and those heroes want to stay near Spirit Host in order to protect them and keep them alive against shooting and melee units that happen to make their way through. You also want to leave room on the flanks because you want to charge in with multiple units. You don't want to have just one big block charge in because you want multiple units charging for Wave of Terror. You want that additional rend. You want to make enemies fight last. These things work really well together with MSU Ghost Style. MSU Ghost Style sounds like a rapper name. That's pretty sick. You want to cast the Purple Sun near the main targets. The Purple Sun only moves 8 inches a turn, so it's not super mobile. But if you stick it in an area where you're fighting primarily, you're fighting over key objectives, hopefully perfect scenario is right in the middle of the board where your enemy has to come to it, and they'll always be in range of the Purple Sun, that's the perfect spot for it. It can also be used to block space, because enemies can't move on top of it. You can move through it, but you can't finish a move on top of it. So if you stick it between two walls, and you stick your ghosts on the other side of the Purple Sun, your opponent cannot finish a charge unless they fly. Very sneaky tactic. Nighthaunt love to stack defensive abilities to absorb charges and then counterattack on their turn. Usually also riposting, especially if you're in range of the Purple Sun, to get bonus rend on both turns. And being able to freely retreat and charge means you can never be tied down. You are okay with taking charges from your enemy. In fact, it's like having an extra mobility. That 8-inch move suddenly doesn't matter if your opponent comes to you.
My experience has been the exact opposite. My experience has been Nighthaunt are ridiculously good on their turn and tend to be very defensive, be able to absorb more damage in that turn that they charge. Almost every time I've beaten Nighthaunt, it's because I've double turned into them and they just can't take that punishment.
Oh, they're definitely a lot.
Jack?
Go ahead.
Huh?
What are you trying to say, Jack?
It's not just you. Like I've played Nighthaunt every time I've been somewhere, and the game always goes the same way. On the Nighthaunt turn, I'm just trying to survive, and then the counterattack, the Nighthaunt player is on the back foot.
For sure. I
They're-
totally.
Jack, what games do you have where Stormcast doesn't play that way?
I think it's because, as we're about to talk about things that are good against Nighthaunt, a lot of the things that are good against Nighthaunt happen on the controlling player's turn. Things like charge mortal wounds, things like hero phase, shutting down commands. These all happen in the controlling player's turn. Nighthaunt are very much an army that wants to deal as much damage during their turn as possible. But what I'm saying is that because they're super defensive, they can absorb charges from an enemy, and then on their turn they get the power turn. They don't have to, if Iron Jaws want to charge you, great. Here's a cheap screen. I put it in your way. You killed it. Now you're in my face, which is exactly what the Nighthaunt player wants. Wave of Terror applying Strike Last is very underrated. It allows you to charge with multiple units rather than just a single unit like Stormcast prefer to do. And the reason we prefer doing that is because when you fight with one unit, then your opponent has a chance to strike. If you charged in with two units, they can hit the unit that hasn't activated yet, which is a huge liability. Nighthaunt suffer less from this. Unfortunately, it's random because Wave of Terror requires rolling a 10+ for that effect. But when you're charging with 4 or 5 units a turn, you're going to probably get a 10+, and then you can make that unit strike last. All of your guys get to go before they get to. So it takes away the risk. Mm-hmm. Against single targets, like if you're fighting against monsters, you probably just want to give it a -1 save debuff. So you're going to strike first with your big hammer unit. -1 save is probably going to keep you safer because you've killed your opponent and then making that thing strike last. Does this all sound about right, Alex? You're the expert here. Have I given a pretty good breakdown of how Nighthaunt want to approach the game?
Something to be most aware of is going to be that Wave of Terror. Especially going with Stormcast, like you have so many different ways to be very deep on the charge in a variety of different fashions. Great example is my very first GT. I fought against a guy who had a unit of concussors, a unit of 4 concussors, and I love the unit, by the way. I don't know, I know why it doesn't get. But, still, I think it's very consistent with 2 damage with the hammers on the concussors. But he had shined the light on them. They were all out defensed and they were mystic shielded. And I charged him with 2 characters, 10-man unit, 2 10-man units of Bladegheist Revenants, and something else, maybe 3 units of Bladegheist instead of 2. But I basically made him -5 to his armor. And I killed all of them in combat alone. And he just, it was I felt bad with a defeated look. He was like, I didn't think that was going to happen. I was like, neither did I, dude.
Dice game, baby.
Yeah, but also he's got a 2-up save -3. So then all of a sudden, -2. So yeah, it was just not working out for him. Oh, wait. And there was a Purple Sun. So yeah, he definitely had a 5-up save. It was rough.
Oof. I hate having a 4-up save on Stormcast. Can't you imagine?
Yeah. Oh, and there was the rend 1 on the Bladegheist.
Oh,
That was why. That's why it disappeared so fast. But yeah, you definitely need to be aware of Wave of Terror, and it only affects a unit within an inch. So that's something to be very, very aware of. You do it after after the unit makes a charge. So if you're fighting against a guy who's Scarlet Doom, for example, and you don't like mix, like there's sometimes people like to bubble wrap in a way where things are like overlapping. If you're fighting against Nighthaunt, you're incentivized not to do that. You're incentivized to do the traditionally less effective version of bubble wrap and just be like flat bubble wrap, one line, maybe two, but full lines instead of overlapping. Because then like you can do your Wave of Terror, and let's say that your has Scarlet Doom, goes in, and you have Liberators defending long strikes. Let's say you have 2 units. Since you don't have units overlapping, let's say that one Bladegheist Revenant unit just absolutely nukes a Liberator unit. Well, now they can't like make something -1 to hit. Maybe they can't make something else. Strike last or anything like that. They basically essentially wasted this ability.
Yep. Not only that, but if the Scarlet Doom charge wipes out the unit, well, maybe there's nothing left in range for you to charge at all. If you're careful with your positioning, you can do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a nice segue into our next point here, which is their weaknesses and limitations. And some of the stuff you just mentioned is right on here. So let's go through it. Wave of Terror, unreliable. It's only active on your turn because when you're charging, that's when you get Wave of Terror. You're not charging on the opponent's turn. For now. We'll see if that changes. When you're fighting defensively, Nighthaunt are a pretty low damage army. You're relying on Discorporate, so you're not getting all out attack. You will, and that's assuming you get Discorporate off. Your rend is increased by Wave of Terror. Purple Sun isn't totally reliable. So in general, your damage on your turn, on the opponent's turn, from the Nighthaunt player's perspective, the Nighthaunt player's damage is lower. So they're not so good fighting defensively, and they unfortunately don't have super high movement so that they can't always pick the fights they want. Whereas Ironjaws, fighting defensively, they're not great either, but they move like 2 tables every turn. So like it's fine for them to not fight well defensively because they just pick the fight they want whenever they want it. 8-inch movement really limits your engagement range. Not being able to run and charge means you have a predictable movement, which is 8 plus run, and then you have a predictable charge, which is 8 plus 2d6. Opponents can just deploy 20.1 inches away from your front line, and you cannot charge them turn 1. You have to rely on the 9-inch Vanishing Phantasms. Nighthaunt also don't have any ranged power. They can't clear screens reliably before charging, which makes it very difficult. You're going to spend a turn charging and fighting and killing screens. There's the discussion of the Olynder stuff. Not really relevant right now. In general, Nighthaunt really struggle with killing screens. There's also no bonuses to pile-in distance. There's no ability to fight twice, which means you have a fixed threat range from the front line. Even when you finish the charge, even if your Scarlet Doom wipes out that screen, you can still only fight something within 4 inches because you'll have a 3-inch pile-in and then 1-inch range. You can, if you get close enough before you charge, you can fly over units and get into the gaps between units. But because it's only an 8-inch move, that's pretty hard to do because you have to finish a move more than 3 inches from an enemy. So it's really hard to just get that close to them all the time. Opponents can be quite savvy with their positioning and very precise. There's no charge bonuses in the army. This was actually one of the things we really liked about the Chronomantic Cogs in Nighthaunt when we did our review. +1 to charge is insanely good on this army, and they got rid of that. And only 1 unit can re-roll with Forward to Victory unless you took a Triumph, like you mentioned earlier, Alex. And 9-inch charges are unreliable. So trying to multi-charge 9 inches, not a reliable strategy. And even when it does happen, probably not good enough to win you the game on its own. Like you got to have that's got to be like an opening salvo type situation. It can't win you the game. Getting Strike Last is unreliable. I know I already mentioned Wave of Terror is unreliable, but Strike Last being a 10 plus is very unreliable. If you're charging with 2 units and relying on Strike Last, that's a gamble, man. That's a Hail Mary play. Only 3 units can be put in reserve, but you need support heroes to get max efficiency out of your units. I think I talked about this earlier. You can't just dump 90 Bladegheist on your opponent's front lawn and hope to win the game like that. You need your support heroes for these units to do anything useful and to survive. The smaller units don't really deal enough damage, but they do give Wave of Terror rolls. So you're wasting space, you're putting resources, and you're putting in units like, do you want to charge a hero into combat just to get an extra Wave of Terror? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's a gamble even when you decide to do it. Larger units, on the other hand, deal huge damage, right? The units of 30 ghosts deal huge damage, but it's only one roll for Wave of Terror. And then you have issues with coherency and your footprint, trying to fit all in combat and staying inside certain ranges of things. So you have to strike this balance. Do you want lots of small units in order to take advantage of Wave of Terror, or do you want big, chunky units that you can put a lot of buffs on and stay alive forever? Spirit Torments. They only... editor's note, this should say combat phase, not battle shock phase. Spirit Torments revive in each combat phase, but they can't revive models if the unit is destroyed. So between hero phase, shooting phase, movement phase, charge phase, and combat phase, your unit can take enough damage to get destroyed, and then the Spirit Torment does literally nothing, which is very unfortunate. There is only one way to revive a unit, and you only get half of that unit back, and it's on a 4+. It's that command trait that we mentioned before. That does make that command trait quite useful, but that's the only way to get it back, which feels pretty bad for a death army. The Cruciator Aura requires a Terrified unit, which means it doesn't work against shooting off the rip unless you can get within 3 inches, because Terrified requires being within 3 inches. Even if you teleport 9 inches away using Spectral Tether or Vanishing Phantasms, that doesn't automatically activate the Cruciator Aura. If you're not engaged in melee, then the Aura is not active. So damage 2 attacks don't get reduced, and damage 1 attacks are never reduced. If you're playing against something like Crossbow Adjudicators or Razor Dawns from Seraphon, they're never getting, the Cruciator Aura does nothing to help you in that situation. A big problem with Nighthaunt is taking damage when you don't have a 5+ ward. It almost feels like the 5+ ward is necessary for this army. Without it, it does drop pretty quickly to focused fire. And unfortunately, only one unit can have Seal of Shyish, and your spells aren't guaranteed. Since you don't have bonuses to cast in most lists, you're quite vulnerable to unbinding. Discorporate can only be used in the shooting and combat phases. If you're taking damage outside of those phases, you will not have a 5+ ward. So charge mortal wounds, hero phase spells, double taps in the hero phase, all these things you cannot use Discorporate against. In those phases that you can use it, it can also get disabled. There's things like the Geminids of Ulgish, and then the spell that any army can use, that can disable your command ability in shooting, and then Roar from monsters can disable your commands in the combat phase. You also can't prevent damage in those phases, and like I said, double taps and impact mortal wounds are all very good. Aside from auto-casting with the Midnight Tome, Nighthaunt are not exceptionally good casters. They're fairly easy to unbind. I'd say about as easy to unbind as Stormcast. And their anti-magic is quite bad, too. They don't have any bonuses to unbinding, and Banshees are not good enough, really, right now. So if you get hit by a big anti-horde spell, or if you get hit by AoE spells, you're in a rough place. There's no monsters, so you can't stop all-out defense or any other commands. Fight first commands in particular are quite brutal for this army. If you try charging into a squad of 15 Hearthguard Berserkers, you have to get them to strike last because you can't roar them. They have a lot of command abilities they want to use, and they don't generate any extra command points. So these are all the major downsides I've found so far with the Nighthaunt army. Can you guys think of any others that I missed out on? I feel like I'm raking the army over the coals. I don't want to be doing that. It's kind of it's a big list. It's
situationally, since you want to see, for now, you exclusively see MSU. You're also going to see units that are, maybe say a 20 or maybe even sometimes a 30-man block. Something that can be really, really hurtful is the Horrorcast. Just to be made aware of, if you have an ability that can prevent them from being like, oh yeah, you did an example, let's say you killed 15 out of 20 Bladegheist Revenants in a unit, corporate, and you did a big Hail Mary and put a bunch of stuff into it, and then it's near Spirit Torment, so 8 models, 5 models become 8 models, but now they're at minus, they're -5 to what they, to how many run. Let's say you roll, they roll a 6, and they can't deny it. Then all of a sudden they're a 2-man unit. The Horrorghast makes an extra T3 run, and now you've just lost the unit. So The Horrorghast can be a fun little spell against big units of Nighthaunt, which again, you're seeing usually the in a Nighthaunt list is going to be a reinforced unit, but on top of that, like we've discussed several times in this episode today, the likelihood of Grieving Legion probably being the move. I don't think that that's impossible. I think that they are going to get a lot more popular over time. So that is definitely something to consider, especially since it's also a spell that's not hard to cast, and it's not expensive. It's only 40 points.
And you can cast it out of unbinding range usually, because it has a 32-inch threat range, I think, on its effect. So if you
within, but
Yep.
yeah.
Yep, so you
Oh,
can
yeah.
target units
Yeah.
on the front line and be out of unbinding range. So combine easy cast with no unbinding, and you have a reliable endless spell that shuts down Inspiring Presence.
Yep.
So how do we counter Nighthaunt? We've talked about their strengths and weaknesses. My answer, personally, is two things. One, overkill. Overkill is always better than underkill. You never want to leave even a single ghost active, or you will find a situation where they revive 2d6 ghosts plus 12 over the next 2 rounds. It is brutal. It is backbreaking if you do not finish off a unit. It doesn't matter which unit it is, because they don't have to pick which unit they revive until they do it. So kill everything you hit, overkill it. Do not try to be, like, you want to be efficient, but not that efficient. The second thing I would say how to counter Nighthaunt is use famous advice from renowned TV show Community. Ghosts can't go through doors, stupid. They're not fire. And what that means is screen. Put screens in the way. You don't want to get charged with, like, keep your fulminators, keep your long strikes out of combat with these guys until it's your turn. Just put useless things in their way to fight, because they have a hard time getting through those screens. Like I was saying, overkill's better than underkill. Don't just finish off units. Don't let them start reviving. When you're building your list, you want to make sure you have a good variety of damage profiles, because you need very different damage types in order to kill Stormcast than you would in order to kill Nighthaunt. Against Stormcast, you want high damage, high rend. It doesn't matter how many attacks it is, but you want really, really powerful attacks. Whereas Nighthaunt don't care about rend, and they can reduce your damage. So you want as many damage 1 attacks as possible. So if you're stuck with a list with 9 long strikes, you're going to have a really hard time against Nighthaunt. Bounty Hunters, as long as it's still around when this video goes live, is very good in this matchup. And in general, I would advise against skipping Bounty Hunters for a pure 1-drop list if you think you're going to face any amount of Nighthaunt that day. Big point here is to kill the support heroes, which is not easy, but it's doable. They're a huge force multiplier defensively and offensively. If you're trying to kill ghosts through a Cruciator aura using damage 2 weapons, you're going to have a really hard time. If you are trying to defend against them and they have +1 to hit and +1 to wound, you're going to have a hard time. So kill the support heroes as quickly as you can. Nighthaunt have almost no ranged power, and they're not a particularly fast army, so turn 1 charges are not reliable. If you deploy far enough away, you can avoid getting charged by most of the army for a turn. This is very similar in terms of tactics to how we played against Ironjaws. If you want to go back and watch our How to Counter Ironjaws video, I highly recommend it. We also have some basic tips here in Stormkeep number 9 where we talk about the hammer and anvil strategy. You can't stop them from charging, but you can put useless stuff in their way. And they hate fighting useless stuff. Alex, can you confirm how much do you hate fighting Liberators?
Oh, I mean, like, Liberators have a use. I mean, they're there to do a few things.
Oh yeah,
mean,
but
like,
there's those tasty
me-
long strikes in the back that you really want to get to.
Well, you know what you can really do to counter Nighthaunt too, especially with how, like, you know, some very effective Stormcast lists have been lately, at least, you know, West Coast ones. You could throw a few long strike. I mean, you could throw a few Aetherwing units in there. You know, they're quick scoring for objectives, but also, you know, they're what, 3 40 mil bases, or they're 32 or 40s.
They're 32.
They're 3 32 mil bases, an inch apart from each other, giving you a 9-inch. You know, that's a pretty wide bubble of that 9-inch. For, you know, say deep strikes or things like that. You know, you could, you know, and they're 65 points for 3, so you could have your Liberator basic battle line. But then you can also have these things like Aether Wings in the front. It makes things more annoying. So you can get a second additional layer against the Nighthaunt charge.
Yeah, single layer is not always totally reliable because the mortal wound charges or other things can take out 10 wounds. Really hard to kill 20, 30 wounds worth of stuff with that, but 10 wounds is definitely in that range where you're like, maybe I should have a backup just in case.
I'm just talking space-wise. So like that's the best part about, you know, the utilization of things, because, you know, they are cheaper than the 5-man unit of Liberators, are faster than the 5-man unit of. So let's say you have your juicy bits not too far in your deployment, but you got stuff around where your opponent's not, the Nighthaunt player's not getting in your backfield. They're only going to have to be able to move forward, right? So let's say that that's the situation that you're currently in. You could put your Liberators, Vindictors, whatever your chosen battle line is. You can, let's say they're 8 or 6 or 8 inches away from the long strikes, just for protection. Nothing's deep striking within the bubble, nothing's deep striking outside of the bubble unless it's outside of 8. Well, what happens when you put 2 units of 3 Aether Wings 6 inches from the Liberators? Well, now even if the Nighthaunt player gets in range of those Aether Wings, then they're not getting into those Liberators at all in any capacity. So you're just making it a much more convenient situation for yourself. Or if you want to be real cheeky, you make it 9 inches away, so which forces like a more traditional charge for the Nighthaunt player if they say don't make any of their charges and double you if it's the bottom of the round and they have the ability to do so, because then they're going to be let's say 18 inches away, or at best 9 inches, or 9 inches away from your Liberators. So it's just really, really good.
Screening is really rough to deal with. Thankfully, a lot of armies don't have that many screens these days because the increased cost across the board in 3rd edition prevents people from just bringing I'll slap on 2 more squads of Aether Wings here. It's like, that's 130 points these days, man. That's hard to find room for. But when you have these units, their value is immense. Being able to just tie up as a proper anvil, just hold that unit in place for a turn, can win you the game. And when you have overlapping screen after screen, it shelters you against even double turns, which is usually how people lose the game, because they just don't have enough stuff in the way.
Yeah, so road bumps are incredibly important.
Yep. Let's look at general tips. I'm really glad you mentioned the Horrorghast because it is the first thing on this list. Horrorghast is great. If you kill 20 ghosts, the last 10 are guaranteed to flee. If you kill 18 ghosts, one might survive because you might roll a 1 on the Horrorghast. But kill 20, the last 10 are gone. It's like dealing 50% more damage guaranteed. I would also say trying to kill the Cruciator is a big deal, especially if you have more than damage 1 weapons. If you've got Grand Hammers, if you've got Fulminators, if you've got any unit from any army that has more than damage 1, you want to try to kill the Cruciator before engaging if you can. Nighthaunt heroes are very durable while they're near the Spirit Host, but they're not immortal. And the fastest way to kill Spirit Hosts is to attack the heroes. Of course, we had that whole discussion. You can scroll back to that. Be efficient with your damage. You don't want to put attacks into units with 5 up board. So you want to unbind Seal of Shyish. That's a priority when you're fighting against Nighthaunt. You want to shut down Discorporate with Geminids from an endless spell, or Roar in the combat phase. If you can, try to do damage in the hero phase and charge phase. If you've got powerful spells, Nighthaunt hate those. If you've got charge phase Mortal Wounds, they hate those. If you're getting charge and you have a really good Unleash Hell, Nighthaunt really hate that as well. What you want to do is bait Discorporate out and then switch targets. Like, oh, that's the unit with a 5 up board? Okay, I'm not going to hit it anymore. I'm not going to shoot it anymore more than I have to, right? Because if you're in combat, you have to fight. But you, like we were talking about earlier, bait out the Discorporate and then switch targets, because you never want to be hitting that 5 up board unless you have to. And the last point here is you want to riposte as much as possible. A riposte is when you counterattack on your opponent's turn. So this means you've put units within 3 inches of your front line. They charge in, they kill your front line, and then you counterpile in on their turn. This is like getting an extra combat phase. So if you have a really good melee hammer unit like Protectors or Grand Hammers that you've somehow left on the table, feel free to riposte with that unit. Area mortal wounds, or what people usually call mortal wound bombs, like the Night Vexillor, the Scepter from the Lord Celestant Prime, Slan Starmaster, all these things that do mortal wounds to multiple units are quite effective against Nighthaunt. Partly because most of these effects you can't discorporate through them, but also that's a lot of different units taking damage, and what Nighthaunt prefer is 1 unit at a time is taking damage, so they can revive it with the Spirit Torment.
They also rely very heavily on these 5 and 6 wound heroes, and so if they take D3 mortal wounds 3 times, you got a pretty good chance of dropping them. And they're all clumped together because the heroes want to be near the units they're supporting.
Yeah, it's really efficient damage to drop D3 mortal wounds on that little cluster of heroes, because they'll have the Spirit Host next to them, so you're going to do D3 to all the heroes, and then D3 to the Spirit Host, and then the heroes are probably going to try to transfer the wounds to the Spirit Host. Before shooting with damage 1 weapons, do not put your units within 12 inches of Cruciator. And because movement happens before shooting, you can just retreat away unless they're playing Grieving Legion, which is one of the reasons it's so strong. But you can actually just retreat your units away, and then the Cruciator aura does not activate, and you can shoot with damage 2 weapons just fine. Without Wave of Terror and Purple Sun, Nighthaunt can struggle to deal meaningful damage, which means you want to fight out of range of the Purple Sun as much as possible. Either get rid of it or just don't fight near it. Try to fight on the edges of its range and don't pile within range of it. Nighthaunt deal low damage with their riposte, whereas Stormcast units are always Ren 2, damage 3. The Ren doesn't matter against Nighthaunt, but you know what I mean. We're always at full capacity. Nighthaunt really deal most of their damage during their own turn. So if they're fighting defensively, they're not going to do a lot of damage back. Wave of Terror, like you mentioned, Alex, only affects one unit within 1 inch, and that's only when you finish your charge. So it's not when you finish your pile-in. So if you happen to charge a unit and kill it with Scarlet Doom, well, that's the unit you would have Wave of Terrored as well. Unless there's another unit in range, of course. But in general, people are going to stick one unit in your face at a time. When you're taking damage from Scarlet Doom charges, try to make their next charge difficult. And what I mean by this is pull models away so that the next unit that's charging is going to have a longer charge or an impossible charge if they're more than 12 inches. So for example, if you have a unit of 5 Liberators spread wide, if the Nighthaunt player charges one side of it with a unit, pull models from the other side, so that when the next unit charges from the other side, it's harder for them to fit their models in range. Nighthaunt fight best when they're overlapping multiple support units on their hammer units, so what you want to do is force them to split up. Kill their flanking units so that they have to leave something behind to hold objectives. Once they've split up their army, you want to start focusing your fire. Take down key targets one at a time. Overkill. Never underkill. Without Allrack, there's very few teleports in this army. There's the Dreadblade Harrow, there's Spectral Tether, there's the initial Deep Strike. But without that Allrack guy around, once the Nighthaunt move into an area, that's the area they're staying in for probably the rest of the game. They're not a very, aside from Hexwraiths, which are a whole other problem. You want to position and pick your targets carefully so that you can reduce the number of units that the Nighthaunt have charging at you, because they want to charge with as many units as possible for Wave of Terror. And what you can do is say, well, if I position in a particular way, this far away on this side, this unit can charge me, but then this unit is going to have a longer charge and maybe they'll fail and they won't get the Wave of Terror off. So that's kind of a vague point, but comes with experience, I suppose. So let's talk about some units that are good to have in a Stormcast army if you're playing against Nighthaunt in particular. Starting off with my favorite one, obviously the Liberators. They're cheap, reliable, 3-up save, 10 wounds. They're just a fantastic little screening unit. Sometimes they even survive combat, and they can get a second round of them screening and wasting people's time. They're fantastic. They can also be revived with Call for Aid, which is seeing a lot of play these days. Because of the changes to Thunderbolt Volley, Call for Aid has become I want to say almost mandatory. It's really, really good. It feels really good to use it to revive a screening unit and then bring it back immediately.
It feels like more of a default pick than Thunderbolt Volley does these days. It's really weird, but we don't necessarily, win off of, like, in later round, like, games are longer, right? They just are. And because of that, getting that extra unit has mattered a lot more for me than ever before. And, like, Thunderbolt Volley is great and all, but sometimes I don't want to build for it. Sometimes I'm still taking like 6 long strikes, for example. That was my last list I played, was still 6 long strikes, and the Call for Aid makes more sense to take as games are going longer. Yeah,
Thunderbolt Volley is still good. It's just that it's not every list. Whereas every time I build a list, I'm like, oh man, it'd be great, 115 more points of Liberators.
Yeah, for sure.
They're always battle lined. They're veterans. They can contest Proving Ground. So as long as that matters for this season, and it does, especially against an army like Nighthaunt that is all veterans, you want as many veterans in your list as you can get. And similar to Liberators are Vanquishers. We did a whole video about why these guys are good, and this is exactly the matchup that they're good in addition to others, but this is one that they certainly excel at. So they're like Liberators, but you trade off -1 to save in order to deal double the damage of your Liberators against any unit with 10 or more models. And just like Liberators, they can be revived with Call for Aid, they can contest Proving Grounds, and if you take a look at their damage in a Bounty Hunters Battalion, it's pretty scary for what a 125-point unit is capable of doing. You typically won't buff them, but sometimes you give them bonuses to hit and wound, but let's just say max 42 damage on 3s and 3s, and that's only with 5 models. And that's pretty good. That's how you chop up units of 10 ghosts real easy.
Oh yeah. Fight on Death as well in Hollow Knights is actually very, very good. It's man, I've always been looking for in Dueling Dragons. I was looking for 5 more points just so I could upgrade to Vanquishers. But yeah, they're really good. The Blaze of Glory thing, it's not like too crazy, but if you do lose the whole line of models, it feels pretty good to roll 15 dice. Sometimes it, it can be that cheeky little bit of damage that gets you over, but. Overall, pretty good improvement. I think that they are, especially for this season, because of all the changes of everything. They're a straight upgrade to Liberators, in my opinion, for this season, of course.
Yeah, and it's worth noting there's a lot of caveats to that. You have to be reliably in scenarios where you're going to be facing units with 10 or more models. That's most armies these days, but with the new Gargant Battle Tome coming out, there's going to be matchups where Vanquishers are just more expensive than Liberators. And in those situations, being able to Blaze of Glory with a couple extra dice is just fine, right? Like, if they're just going to die all the same, it's not a big deal. They're still veterans,
10 points.
Yeah, it's not a big deal to trade 10 points to get that additional utility. Spamming Vanquishers, I don't recommend that, right? Like, there's limited slots in Bounty Hunters, and there's better units to put in that battalion. But usually how it goes with Stormcast lists is you'll have 1 or 2 units that go in Bounty Hunters, and the third slot can easily be Vanquishers.
Yep.
They're also really good with the Lord Imperator, because he can give them a 7-inch reserve deployment instead of the standard 9-inch from Scions. And I typically don't rely on 9-inch Scions charges, but when you have a 7-inch, that's pretty reliable. As we saw earlier on the Purple Sun slide, you have something like a 2+ effectively to charge into combat. Like the same odds as rolling a 2+ on a single dice. So Vanquishers are great pick in general, but also against Nighthaunt in particular.
Yeah, you just slam them in, take out, you can take out an MSU unit. Because you want to fully kill units off, of course, because of all the healing like we talked about earlier, reviving bottles and such. You want to make sure you fully take out something. So even taking out an MSU squad and then bringing back your Vanks the next turn, making your opponent deal with them, it's just really strong.
Yeah, there's been a lot of times where I drop in a squad of 5 Vanquishers, they kill 10 Bladegheist Revenants because I've disabled the 5-up ward through other means, or just they're not a high priority target, so they don't ward that unit. Then they die when the opponent counterattacks, and then they fight on death to finish off the unit that attacked them. Then on the opponent's turn, I revive them, and then back on my turn, they can move and charge normally. So really, really fun to do all that in a Hallow Strike list. Another excellent unit to put in your list against Nighthaunt are Judicators with Boltstorm crossbows. They are a high volume shooting unit. Now 20 damage at 3s and 3s doesn't sound too impressive compared to Vanquishers doing 42 damage. But remember that 42 damage includes the Bounty Hunter bonus, and without that, they're gonna if you have a Cruciator on the other side of the board giving you -1 damage, your 42 drops down to a 21, which effectively means you could just be shooting with Judicators instead. Judicators are not the highest range in the Stormcast army. They're only 18-inch range, but that's not a problem when you're facing Nighthaunt because they're such an aggressive army. Usually the stuff you want to be shooting is going to be in your face anyway. They're not really going to be hiding anything too far back because they want to stay in range of all their support heroes, so it's pretty easy to just reach over and shoot the things you want. Like the other Redeemer units we just talked about here, Judicators are veterans. They can contest Proving Grounds, and that's not something that Long Strikes can do. So if you're looking to build a good balanced list that has enough veterans that can contest that stuff, but you need shooting, well, Judicators can fit in there very nicely. And when you have a big unit of Judicators, that Unleash Hell really hurts Nighthaunt. If they're charging in to eating 15 Judicators shooting at them, they can't discorporate in the charge phase. It's a lot of damage. You can wipe out units of 10 ghosts fairly reliably.
It's really nice, and they also get the battle tactic for killing a GB with your GB, and they're really good at that. It's great.
Yeah, it's just about our only way to get it. I don't reliably get it with Vanquishers very often, but crossbows are always the ones to bring it home.
Mm-hmm. Tactics more important than ever this season, for sure. It's a lot of games coming down to getting all your tactics in.
Next up, another unit we like using are the Tempesters. We did a video about these guys too, but they are a high volume shooting unit because they're for 2 models for 220 points. You're getting 12 damage at 3s and 3s, and then 2d3 breath attacks hitting on 4s effectively, which adds up. I wouldn't just bring 2 Tempesters. This is the kind of unit you want to bring in a squad of 4 or maybe 2 squads of 2 and give them both +1 to hit somehow. But in addition to their shooting, they also have good melee attacks. If you charge in with Bounty Hunters, these guys are looking at 12 damage on 3s and 4s and 18 damage on 3s and 3s in melee. which when you add to the shooting damage is respectable. This is a unit you don't have to send into melee. You can just sit back and shoot and take good defensive positions. When they charge you, you can unleash hell, do a lot of damage that way, and then counter it. You can even riposte because, as we've mentioned a few times, there's ways to play around the specific ranges that Nighthaunt have. Unlike Judicators, they have a 3-up save, which means they're actually a good target for save stacking. This is not a bad unit to bring with a Lord Castellan, with Mystic Shield, with all-out defense. As we said, Nighthaunt don't really have a lot of monsters that can disable this sort of thing. You know, Olynder can disable commands and the Banshee, but those things aren't seeing play right now. So in general, Tempestors, a block of 4, is actually pretty good to save stack on. You can get them, you know, a 2+ save ignoring Rend 2, and that makes it really hard for Nighthaunt to do any damage, aside from the Bladegheist charges, which you can just screen out with your Liberators.
Yeah, mobile shooting platform as well, since they move that 10 inches, which really helps a lot against Nighthaunt because they're going to be very mobile with their ability to retreat and in charge. They're able to pretty much move where they want to, and so giving yourself some mobility to counter that is really important.
Yeah, Nighthaunt have this really annoying habit of retreating from combat with the Liberators and then charging into something else, and the Liberators just won't be able to keep up with that mobility, usually, because, you know, 8-inch versus 5-inch, and then both of them charge the same. Tempestors, on the other hand, don't have a problem with that because they move 10 inches. So if the Nighthaunt retreats and charges something else, Tempestors can always re-engage on that. The only downside, I'd say, with this unit is it can't contest Proving Grounds. And there's been a few times where I run, you know, too few veteran units, and a crucial moment in the game called Proving Grounds on an objective that I'm controlling, and they just put one model on it, and I just lose that one, and it's a pretty awful feeling. So be careful when you're building your list. You don't want to go too heavy on elite units like this. Speaking of elite units, there's Fulminators. Fulminators are our highest damage melee unit, so it's no surprise that they're also going to be amazing against Nighthaunt. Even though they ignore Rend 2, you still do a tremendous amount of damage. We're looking at 58 damage on 3s and 3s, which can be easily increased to 2s and 2s. With a unit like that, you want to stack buffs on them, and that's per 2 models. So if you have a squad of 4 Fulminators or 2 squads of 2, you're looking at a tremendous amount of damage. It's about the only way Stormcast can, without having to disable wards, they can punch through those 30 ghost blocks that we've been talking about. When you have damage 4, you're less impacted by the Cruciator aura than you would be if you only had damage 2, because on damage 2, that's a 50% damage reduction, but on damage 4, you're only looking at 25% damage reduction. So these guys are, you know, they see a Cruciator and they're like, oh no, I'm only 3 damage. How terrible. Every attack only kills 3 ghosts. Oh no. Yeah. But that charge bonus damage is really important, right? So there's a specific threat range you need to stay out of, because if one ghost gets within 3 inches of your unit, you can't charge that turn unless you want to rely on some kind of translocation, battle mage, wild form combo. But in general, it's better to charge with this unit rather than riposte immediately on the opponent's turn. And they have a 3+ save like Tempestors. They're a good unit to stack saves on. So after they get their killing done, they're left in a vulnerable position, and your opponent will charge them, so it's a good idea to try to save stack on them. Keep them alive. Dan, talk about Stormdrakes. I know how much you've been enjoying Stormdrakes lately.
Absolutely. Stormdrake Guard into Nighthaunt. I've had to do this matchup so many times. I can't say that I've won all of them, but I have won more than half. I'll say that with Stormdrake Guard, of course, the breath attack dealing the mortals is extremely good. If you do swing well on that, or even just swinging average, a lot of the time, I'll be honest, in games, I'm just happy with average. But when you do swing high, it feels super good because you can start taking out a whole bunch of ghosts. Sometimes it kind of baits people a little bit too because they don't know if they should discorporate. Sometimes I do try to shoot different targets than what I'd be shooting with my crossbows. And like for example with crossbows, sometimes I do try to eat a little more of the like the battle line, some of the Bladegheist out. But with Stormdrake Guard, I actually just shoot straight for the heroes because I'm no longer taking the penalty for Lookout Sir. Yes. And the mortals, just help cut through. So sometimes I go ahead and try for that approach. So breath attack, just really good. The melee, we just talked about how Stormdrake Guard do suffer a little bit with high wound, low save models. These are kind of interesting because of course Nighthaunt, they don't take rend, so they have like a decent amount of wounds because of a lot of the Discorporate gives them artificially more wounds as well as the -1 damage. But we do have a high volume, and the Bounty Hunters does help a lot even though of course sword attacks only go to 2 damage, going back down to 1 with a Cruciator. The claw attacks maintaining their efficiency for 2 damage is still really strong. So I do always recommend taking Bounty Hunters just because of Nighthaunt. But it is 48 damage at 3s and 3s for 2 models. But I am usually reinforcing Storm Drakes. I'm not usually taking like just a single one unless it's a more utility Storm Drake. So when we're looking at damage, we're looking at a lot of damage when you're looking at 4 models there. If you just multiply that by 2 pretty much. They are durable with a 3-up save, and stacking on Storm Drake Guard is so satisfying. The amount of space they take up on the board is really nice. When you can stack them with like a Castellant, for example, and then throw like a Gardas Ward on there, you've got 56 effective wounds on a 2-up save before AOD, before Storm Drakes can get cover, because they're only 9 wounds. So you can get to reducing 3 rend easily with the all the save bonuses you can go on there, as well as a 5-up ward. So you've got 56 wounds, which is half of a lot of armies. Able to take those save reductions and not really worry about it, as well as the 4-up to ignore spells. It helps a bunch against the Purple Sun, which is of course somewhat of an allegiance ability for Nighthaunt. On a 4-up, you get to ignore it, which it is the first time that you enter into the aura. So you enter the aura. You don't roll it every time you have to make a save. Just throw that one out there. So Storm Drake Guard really do a good job being durable into Nighthaunt. Actually, they're very efficient to save stack on, and that works well against Nighthaunt. Of course, they're monsters, so you can use Roar to stop Discorporate. Super huge in the combat phase. One of the biggest things that, even though Storm Drake Guard might not do as much damage as Fulminators, you can negate their defensives with that, or alongside Fulminators, you can use them for their utility. If I'm running like a 2-model Storm Drake Guard, it's for the utility of Roar, which is huge. The stopping that 5-up ward on a block of 15 Bladegheist is the difference between that Fulminator block wiping them or not wiping them, for example. Double tapping with 4 Storm Drakes, also very good, like we talked about the breath attack before. If you are running a Knight Draconis, which I do still think you can run like a full Oops All Dragons, kind of the old style of doing it, still definitely viable to do, especially with Nighthaunt. It can be a little more of a prolonged engagement, so you do get the chance to actually double tap for the Knight Draconis. And yeah, my favorite part, something people always forget, Dragged into the Tempest immediately takes out a model without having to worry about Ethereal, without having to worry about wards. You just, boom, take out a model, which doesn't sound like a lot, but sometimes that can be the last model, just because of the profile that Storm Drake Guard have. Sometimes you find yourself missing a model, and it can be very annoying with that revive. So, removing that 1 extra model is one less thing they can revive, or even wiping a whole unit.
Another good unit to use in this season against Nighthaunt are the Evocators on Celestial Dracolines. They have a 12-inch move like Storm Drake Guard. They can unbind and dispel, and in this particular matchup, an unbind with no bonuses is actually not the worst thing in the world, because you're not facing an army that's trying to cast on 10s and 11s usually, like if you're playing against Seraphon or Tzeentch or something. This army is casting on 5s and 6s, so you actually have a decent chance of making that unbind matter. They give themselves Empower. You don't have to bring a wizard alongside them to give them Celestial Blades to get max efficiency. They are also high volume attackers. You're looking at 51 damage for every 3 models, approximately 51. It depends on which weapon loadout you bring. And then after attacking, you deal a whole bunch of mortal wounds, which you could put into a different target. So this is one thing I really like about Evocators, is that you wipe out a whole squad of ghosts, and then if one model's within 1 inch of a hero, you just send all your mortal wounds into that hero. And that hero can't discorporate this because they're not being targeted with an attack. This is just an ability that's being activated. So even if they have discorporate available, they can't use it against this, which is really, really cool. And something I've been thinking about lately, the way Nighthaunt approach battle is they will screen out behind themselves in order to make sure you can't land units more than 9 inches with Sounds of the Storm. But if you use Louch on the Soulseeker to get an 18-inch move, well, that puts you more than 9 inches from an enemy, and then you can move 12 inches immediately. So you're actually, with, if the opportunity presents itself, there's possibilities that the Evocators can actually just charge into the heroes directly, which is something that none of our other units can do. Even Storm Drake Guard have trouble finishing a charge and ending in cohesion because of the way Nighthaunt position themselves in their castle. It's not always possible to fit all 4 Drakes between the heroes and the front line, but Evocators actually have that potential. It's not something that comes up often, but it's a nice little thing when it does come up.
Evocators are like 20 points from being amazing. Like, absolutely. Oh, not amazing. Like, they're great. I'm just saying, like, for being, like, Fulminator level.
Yeah, I wish they were like 240, 250. They're good. They're just not efficient right now. So it's a bummer because I've got 2 squads painted up and I really want to use them more often.
Ooh.
Stormstrike Chariots are a great unit to use in your army. They have a large base, which takes up a lot of space, which can make it difficult to finish moves and charge over. This is something Nighthaunt love to do, is to jump over these little, let's say 40 mil bases that Stormcast have. They love to just jump over to the other side with their charges or their pylons or things like that. That's not going to happen with a chariot. It's a big boy. It's not going to let any ghost. A big issue a lot of screening units have is that as they take wounds, you lose board space. So let's say you're playing against somebody and they shoot down some liberators. They do a little bit of chip mortal wounds, or they throw some weak shooting attack, and it kills like 2 or 3 liberators. Well, now those guys are gone, and the enemy can move into that space or charge past you. So even though you might have like a perfect choke point set up and your liberators are blocking all movement, as soon as a couple guys die, well, now there's space to get through it. But with the Stormstrike Chariot, that's not a problem because it's 12 wounds that have to be all 12 are gone before you lose any board space, which is a really big deal, especially on a 12 wound model, 3-up save, and you can give it a Gardas aura for only 165 points. That is a phenomenal defensive profile. Then after you've broken out of your castle formation, they have a 12-inch move, just like all of our fastest units. So it's like the fastest speed you're going to find in Stormcast, so they can keep up with everything. They have this great mortal wound charge, which the enemy can't use Discorporate on, so sometimes that just swings high and you obliterate stuff. And they do decent damage, especially when they're in a Bounty Hunters battalion. But the problem Stormstrike Chariots usually run into is that there's just not enough slots in that Bounty Hunters battalion because you can't reinforce the chariots. Putting a single chariot in there usually isn't worth it. You're better off putting even Vanquishers in that slot or any other melee hammer unit. So not the best choice for Bounty Hunters, but they have so much utility defensively and in terms of mobility and defense, and their mortal wound charge is excellent as well. So we can't say enough about chariots lately. We feel we're using them a lot.
Yeah. On that large amount of dice, that -1 to hit after charging can be very, very impactful too. When you're attacking them and them trying to hit you back. It's pretty nice. I love chariots.
Yeah, that -1 hit adds up because the Nighthaunt player is usually not going to use Discorp. They're not going to use all-out attack defensively. They're usually going to use Discorporate if you charge into them. So when it comes time for them to attack, so like you attack with your main hammer unit, then they have a chance to attack. They'll put the attacks into your chariot. Well, now that chariot's on -1. So if they're using Bladegheist, they're going to be hitting on 4s, and if they're using Grimghast Reapers, they're going to be hitting on 5s. It's going to be brutal.
Great.
Let's talk about the Kronspine. Best unit in the game, right? The biggest thing the Kronspine does is that it prevents Nighthaunt from retreating and charging, which is it's so huge to lock down that army. Nighthaunt not being able to charge completely disables so much of their army. Wave of Terror is just gone. They don't get access to the mortal wounds from Scarlet Doom. You lock them in place in attrition style combat, which is that they don't want to do that. They want to be retreating and charging every single turn. In a pinch, the Kronspine can also eat the Purple Sun. I don't recommend this. It's very, very risky. But, if that's what you need to win the game, it can do that. And it's guaranteed to survive at least one turn. Even no matter how much damage it takes, it only loses 1 level per turn. So you can have it sit in the middle of your army, and all of the Nighthaunt army can crash into it, and it'll still be there for at least 1 more turn. And that's a lot of defensive utility that you just can't find in another unit.
Mm-hmm.
It also fights back reasonably well. It's not the best fighter in the game, especially because it relies so much on its Ren to do damage, and Nighthaunt just ignore that, but that's fine. It gives nearby enemy wizards -1 to cast, in addition to your own wizards, so watch out for that. If you're within range to benefit from it, then you're also going to get -1 cast, so just make sure your wizards are not there. And it's also a monster, like Stormdrake Guard, so a lot of lists are going to have a choice. Do you want to take 2 Stormdrake Guard as a support unit, or do you want to take a Kronspine? Very similar in points. I think only about 60-point difference right now as of recording this video. So it's not a hard choice for a lot of lists. It's really easy to fit the Kronspine in there.
Yeah, it's a great unit alongside Stormdrake Guard as well, just to hold things down and play goalie. It does so well into Nighthaunt. Like just removing your allegiance ability is really strong. It turns out.
Yeah, could you imagine if there was an army that just had, I don't know, like an artifact they could take? It's like, oh yeah, you can't use reserve deployments. That's how brutal this is for Nighthaunt. Not being able to retreat and charge near this thing is really rough.
I love protectors, and I have used them into Nighthaunt, and they are obnoxiously. So obviously, as the nameplate says, protectors get their +1 to save, putting them on a 2-up all the time, which then you can stack by applying save bonuses to get them to like ignoring Ren 3 on a 2-up save. Without being reinforced, they're 15 wounds. And when you do reinforce them, that then goes to 20. That is an incredibly high defensive volume of wounds and saves to get through in order for Nighthaunt to try to get these guys out. The glaives are an absolute massive number of attacks, and when you put them in bounty hunters, that volume of attacks combined with double damage means that they will just cut through even with the ethereal unrendable saves. The Star Soul Maces can be good if you, especially when you use them with Unleash Thy Hatred, because they get +1 attack along with the rest of the Paladins. So if you're running them double reinforce so that you got 4 Star Soul Maces, that is then 8 dice on a 2-up doing D3 mortal wounds. And that will pretty much take out most of anything they go up against. So if you come up against the bigger Nighthaunt heroes with the higher wounds and the mortal wound, the ward saves, the Star Soul Maces can just explode them. Regardless of whether or not they're Galatian veterans, protectors have a 3-inch reach natively, which means that the entire unit always gets to fight. And that's really good for their repost, so that if they need to step up and get into combat, that effectively gives them 6 inches that they can start hitting things. So they're very, very good for positioning behind your screens, allowing your liberators to soak the mortal wound charge from the Bladegeists and then have these guys step up and just cut them to pieces. As all Stormcast players who have run their Paladins know, they are very, very slow. So you'll need to rely on either deep striking them into position or translocating them to get them where you need them. Once they're there, they aren't going to move much, so you need to plan ahead. But it does make them a really, really great counterattack unit if the Nighthaunt player tries to strike you before you've had a chance to really get positioned. The only problem that they suffer is that they don't have a denial of retreat, which means that, yeah, your Paladin, your Protectors can go in, do a lot of damage, but the Nighthaunt can just run away and go fight something else, which is a common theme that you're going to run into with all of our melee hammers.
All the Paladins, at least. Yeah. Protectors are great. 10 damage per model in Bounty Hunters, it does get reduced by the Cruciator aura, but we have ways to deal with the Cruciator that some armies just don't, so it's still worth considering just how much damage these guys are going to do. When the Nighthaunt crash onto you, they're going to be chopping their way out, no problem. They're fantastic. And unlike Fulminators, they're going to survive, pretty much guaranteed. It's really hard to take down this unit if it's reinforced.
Yeah, the very first time, okay, so the second time I fought Nighthaunt under the new book, I brought Protectors and Crossbow Judicators, and the 10-man unit of Protectors killed 1,500 points of Nighthaunt by themselves.
That's fantastic.
It was so good.
Well, yeah. If they deliver those wounds to you, you might as well do something about it.
Yeah, man. With a Battle Mage and a Relictor, these guys can take over the world, Yep.
Yeah, they are excellent.
4 inches at a time. Decimators. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Oh no, I was just saying that's the Relictor. Really good for. You just take over the whole board.
Yeah. Oh. It would be so nice if Paladins could move after being translocated. All right. Decimators are pretty much like Protectors, but you trade -1 save for +2 attacks if you're outnumbered, which against Nighthaunt you're always going to be outnumbered. And what makes this really good is that if you have just 5 models, like 5 Decimators, they're going to do a whopping 72 damage on 2s and 2s. And it's really easy to get 2s and 2s because you can give them all-out attack and Celestial Blades, or if you're just playing Knights Excelsior, they're going to get outnumbered. They're going to get the +1/+1 bonus from that subfaction ability. So 5 models doing 72 damage, I think might just be the grossest thing that this army is capable of doing against Nighthaunt in particular. So don't count out Decimators. They are a fine tech unit. If you know you're facing a lot of Horde armies, if you're playing against a lot of Daughters of Cain, a lot of Lumineth Realm Lords, a lot of Nighthaunt, then consider adding Decimators. I wouldn't, build a list around them entirely, but they are a fine unit to have when they do that much damage. They have all the same problems Protectors have, super slow, and that's pretty much the only problem. End of list. They're just slow, and you got to deal with that. But a unit that's not slow and is really easy to deal with are Annihilators with Meteoric Grandhammers. So they do mortal wounds when they deploy and whenever they charge, which means that you can't discorporate against those because you're not targeting anything. And although they only have 11 attacks for 3 models, they still do 44 damage on 3s and 2s, not 3s and 3s like a lot of other units. So this is really easy to get to 2s and 2s because you just all-out attack and you're at max accuracy possible. They don't have to have another wizard cast Celestial Blades on them. They can come in out of reserve, so they're never worried about taking damage or dying early. But they do have to take a Lord Imperator, which is rough. And unlike Stormdrake Guard, which are a comparable unit in terms of threat ranges and things like that, they're both melee hammers. They can't roar, which is a big problem because Annihilators want to go in deep into the enemy army, whereas other units we have will try to fight together. Like we'll have Stormdrake Guard charge in alongside a unit of Fulminators and they can support each other. Grandhammers don't really do that. They're kind of solo players. They go in on their own, and without roar, that damage can just bounce off those Nighthaunt, which is a very frustrating experience. But otherwise, they're great. Just because Nighthaunt ignored Ren 2 doesn't mean these guys are bad. They are still an excellent unit at killing ghosts.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, Paul, that discussion point about roar, is that really a concern with Nighthaunt, given the fact that they don't natively have access to any monsters other than the Morngul that very few people own?
No, I mean the Annihilators can't roar. Not that Nighthaunt can't.
No, yes, no. Well, but Nighthaunt don't have any monsters. Yeah,
but you still want to kill them, right? Like, and if they're using Discorporate.
We're talking about roar from our side to stop them from discorporating.
Oh. Gotcha. Okay, I'm with you now. With you.
Okay.
Yeah. I do think, obviously they work really well with dragons because, they're so fast and they can help you. A lot of the time, Nighthaunt moves up into the mid-board. I mean, they're a fairly mid-board army. They don't have any shooting, so they do have to move up to you. So Stormdrake Guard getting to a target isn't too hard, as long as it's not, something that is deep in their side or on the other side. If they left an opening for you, then, well, whatever they're hitting is probably going to die anyway, even to the mortals.
Yeah, it's just an issue against longer ranged armies, like you're playing against Lumineth with their 30-inch shooting, or 36-inch if they're using ballistas. Stormdrakes are not going to be able to support Grandhammers on the charge there, because that army loves to play super far back, and they're not going to be moving into the middle of the board like Nighthaunt. So sometimes you see these units paired together, but they're not necessarily the best combo that's going to work in all matchups.
And that's not fair, Daniel. Nighthaunt do have shooting.
Oh, okay.
Technically, they do. Yes.
It exists.
It exists. It is not good, and no one takes it. But they do have a shooting unit.
Yeah, we didn't even mention the crossbows. They're just so bad. It's never worth talking about.
Cruciator shoots. Olynder shoots. No.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some really good heroes you can have in your army. First up, I think, is the Lord Castellan. That +1 save it's usually the +1 save you need to just completely ignore Wave of Terror, right? Like between All Out Defense, Mystic Shield, and like you'll get to +2 pretty easily. Cover's not reliable enough, so I wouldn't count it. But sometimes that +3 is what you need to have a 2+ ignoring everything that they send at you, because they'll only have like 2 or 3 units charge, and maybe not all of them get the Wave of Terror roll. So Lord Castellan just happens to be that extra +1 save that you need. And when Nighthaunt when Nighthaunt's trying to get through 2+ saves, it's not going to go well for them. They're not the highest damage army. They rely on that extra rend from Wave of Terror to punch through things. And in a pinch, the Lantern can also do D3 mortal wounds, which can't be discorporated against. So that's not bad either. Highly recommend bringing a Wizard General with Master of Magic as the command trait, because you can reliably cast Mystic Shield or Thundershock, which, as we discussed, is pretty good against Nighthaunt. It cancels out their +1 to wound aura. And it also is the best way for us to dispel the Purple Sun. Aside from getting, a Rune Lord on Arcane Terrain, if you happen to have that in your list, that's great. But otherwise, the best thing we're looking at is trying to reroll that 9, or reroll the 9 in order to dispel. A Knight Incantor is a good pick. The Voidstorm Scroll being able to unbind one spell is good. Obviously it can't stop the Purple Tome, but it's still very good against the Seal of Shyish, which is the 5-up ward spell, and Shade Mist, which is -1 to wound. And while you can cast Spirit Storm to reduce their charge rolls, note that this is a pulse effect and not an aura. The ability doesn't say that units have to remain in range of it, so it just affects units when you cast it, and that's it, which is probably why it's an 18-inch range and not something much smaller. Gardas Steel Soul, arguably the best hero in the book, aside from the Lord Relictor, but against Nighthaunt, plus 50% effective health is exceptional, because they're a good damage army, but they're not like Daughters of Cain level damage, where they're just going to obliterate you no matter what your defenses are. And if you're playing a castle formation, his 5+ ward aura covers your whole army, which is really, really good. And if you're playing aggressively, like let's say you're running up forwards with a squad of 4 dragons like you were talking about, Dan, then you can just drop Gardas into play with Silence of the Storm, and he's immediately in range to support those dragons.
Yeah, Gardas is so good. Using Gardas with dragons, definitely a great one. But using dragon or Gardas with anything, Dracoths even as well, it's all going to be good, because that 5-up ward is going to do a lot of work against Nighthaunt. They actually don't do like buckets and buckets like you were talking about. It's not Dock level damage. It's really good damage, but it's not. They're not fulminators. They're not Dock. They're. It's something that you can definitely survive, and Gardas does a great job of that.
Yeah, they're not the new slaves to darkness ogroids, right?
Okay.
Or I'm trying to think of some Lumineth unit that does high damage, and I can't think of one.
Ouch.
They're not, like, even when double reinforced, they're not the highest hitting army.
Yeah.
They're not rolling buckets of dice at you, or it's not that much. A Lord Celestin on Stardrake, I think, is a really interesting pick. He gives -1 to cast for enemy wizards that are within 18, and when Nighthaunt have no bonuses to cast, this is a significant debuff to them. He has a 3+ save, which you can stack up really well because he's a hero, which means you can use All-Out Defense, Mystic Shield, and their Finest Hour as a heroic action, which is honestly something I forget exists sometimes these days, because my heroes always just use Heroic Leadership, and their Finest Hour is not really going to save them. The best thing about the Stardrake is definitely the Cavernous Jaws. It just automatically kills 1 wound models, 3 of them when you pile in, and this is before they have a chance to activate any abilities or anything. This is after you pile in, but before you attack. So you just gobble up ghosts. It has a 2 in 3 chance of killing spirit hosts, and a 1 in 3 chance of just instantly killing 5 wound heroes. So if your Stardrake can, push in, pile in past the unit, and just happen to get in range of a hero, then you can just have a 1 in 3 chance of gobbling up. And when you're at full health, you have 3 chances. That's pretty good chance to just kill the support hero instantly. Now, it's less likely to kill a Cruciator, but if you kill the Spirit Torment, that's like killing minimum 3 models per turn. He's also a monster, which means he can roar or he can stomp in order to deal extra damage. His Sigmarite Thunder Shield does a bunch of mortal wounds that really add up over time, and your opponent can't Discorporate against those because they're not being targeted by an attack. Unless they have Discorporate active from a previous combat and then they attack into you, but generally they can't use it reactively in that situation. I'd say the main downside of the Lord Celestin on Stardrake is that his actual melee damage isn't that great. His high rend shooting attack is not really useful in this matchup. It's going to do maybe 8 damage max, but his melee combat just kind of suffers. Like, if you're going to spend 500 points on a melee unit, you want it to do a lot more damage than what the Lord Celestin can do. Being able to auto-kill dudes is really good. The rest of your list just has to be really high damage in order to make this guy a good pick.
Stardrake can be really good. I do wish that he had a little more going on, but it is nice. I think Sigmarite Thundershield actually is going to do a decent amount of mortals just because they have a lot of 1 damage attacks. So that is going to help a lot, and that's pretty nice. You're making all those saves. It can be really, really good, actually. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, because they're 1 wound models, right? So every save roll of 6 that they send against you effectively kills one of their models, unless they happen to get a 6-up ward.
Don't Nighthaunt inherently have a 6-up ward?
They do, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Unless they, get lucky, which I never count a 6-up ward.
Oh,
for
unless
anything.
they roll,
Yeah.
their 6-up ward. Okay, I see what you're saying.
6-up wards to me are like, oh, he got lucky. That's it. A 5-up ward is like, okay, I got to play differently. 6-up ward is they got lucky.
Yeah. Agreed.
On the topic of magical dragons, let's talk about Krulghast against Nighthaunt. So he does a lot. Do you guys want to take it away? Because I could talk all day about Krulghast.
Dan, I don't actually have a lot of experience with Krulghast.
You had started to say something, so I thought that you were going to. So Krulghast is really good into Nighthaunt, actually. You probably wouldn't expect it. But one of their great things, if you can cast something off like Geminids, is really good for stopping Discorporate. Him being able to cast anything between Thundershock, just Mystic Shield, his casting being so strong, Nighthaunt aren't really going to be able to unbind. They don't really have bonuses for that. And so Krulghast is just going to be able to do what he wants to do and what he's there for, which is really nice because a lot of the time, we have a lot of Magic Dom that can shut him down, and Nighthaunt just can't do that. Krulghast being a monster, of course, can roar, stop Discorporate, which really helps for his tail, which is going to do amazing damage into those ghosts. He's got a 3-up save base, so he can do the same thing like Stardrake can. You can give him Mystic Shield, he can give himself Mystic Shield, all at defense, and give himself Finest Hour as well, which is going to be super crucial if you're playing Krulghast. Good use of Finest Hour is going to differentiate a good Krulghast player from a bad one. His spell, I definitely think that Meteor Hail is going to be the best one. Worsening Rend by 1 actually matters a ton into the Bladegheist, which are going to be like what you see in 90% of cases, I'd say. But worsening that Rend is just going to make him, that much better. You did include the Ancient Master War in combination with that, in combination with being able to roar, for example, to stop all defense or all attack. Worsening the Rend, as well as reducing the amount of attacks the unit's going to get. So Bladegheist going from 3 to 2 attacks is extremely good for him. He's actually going to be able to survive quite a bit into Nighthaunt, and along with the tail to do damage. Right back, if he gets charged, by a block of Bladegheist, maybe if it's not 30 Bladegheist, but if it's like a 1 reinforce or a MSU unit, he's going to be able to take that unit out back. The only bad thing I'd say is he could go into Bounty Hunters. That tail would be absolutely amazing because for every hit that went through, it would have done 3 damage. Pretty good. I'm really liking Krulghast. Even into Nighthaunt, I'd consider taking Celestial Blades even just to make sure I can get damage out. But every spell you can do there between Thundershock or Celestial Blades, whatever you pick, is going to be good into them. And Krulghast, surprisingly enough, could be just as tanky as a Stardrake into. Now that I'm looking at it, he's got a lot of tools to stop them from taking him out. Especially if he has like a Gardas. Yeah, if he has like a Gardas or something to help with the mortals from Bladegheist, Krulghast can actually do a lot of work in an Nighthaunt.
If you just keep him, more than 1 inch from the front line, he can't get charged, so he avoids the mortals entirely. You let your little Liberator units soak those up and die for him, deal some mortal wounds back with Blaze of Glory, and then he counterpiles it and has his tail do tremendous damage. Hopefully you've done something to deal with the Cruciator, because reducing that tail from 2 to 1 really sucks. But if you have 2 different units next to each other, like let's say their support heroes charge you, you can actually take the tail attacks and put them into the hero. So you'll get 10 attacks minimum from fighting a Nighthaunt unit, and you can just put them all into the hero instead.
Yeah.
Can't stress enough how good Ancient Master of War is if you're fighting Bladegheist Revenants on their turn. Like if they're hitting you back, they're down to 1 attack. You've already cut half their damage down, and when they're charging you, before they roll any dice, you've cut their damage down by 1/3. It's incredibly strong. This is one of the best defensive abilities to have against this specific meta. And now that the Purple Sun has been changed and can't instantly kill the Stardrake or Krulghast, I think it's a good list to have against them. We have an archetype in our Discord server called Krulghast. The core of that list is about using Krulghast with his spell to reduce the enemy save rolls, combine that with a Purple Sun, and now you're effectively shooting everything at Rend 2. But you don't have to use the bonus. You don't have to use the spell that reduces save rolls. You can use other ones. Like Atavistic Tempest is an excellent utility spell. People should really read every single effect that it has because it's very good.
Yeah, situationally, it can stop a lot of things. Even the -1 to shooting in some armies can really come into play. That being said, Krulghast are really good in general because it does focus on a lot of, for example, crossbows. It relies on crossbows and it relies on Tempesters, 2 units that we've already covered that are great into Nighthaunt.
Yeah, I've actually been thinking Krulghast into Gargant seems like an interesting matchup because when you have Ren 2 Tempesters, or Ren 3 Tempesters, I should say, that's pretty spooky. Ren 4 in combat really cuts through those Gargants easily. Okay, that wraps it up for this episode of How to Counter Everything. Thank you, everybody, for listening and sticking with us through this super long episode. I want to give a shout out to our special guest, Alex, for coming on today to talk about Nighthaunt.
Thank you guys for watching, of course. And if you have any questions, feel free to always hop into our Discord, which will be linked down below. It's a great place, a lot of great minds, not even just Stormcast thoughts. We have a lot of discussion about several different armies, when books come out. We do try to discuss a lot of different topics. So if you haven't tried it out before, definitely give a shot at getting into our Discord and joining that awesome conversation. We try to interact as much as we can, and I learned just as much from you guys as I feel like you guys might learn from us. So thanks for watching. Definitely check out Kaiju Gaming Lounge, our sponsor. If you would like some measurement tools or something of the sort, like I talked about earlier, you can check it out at facebook.com/KGL-Orlando. They're taking orders there currently as they work on their storefront. Other than that, yeah, Jack?
I feel like repeating thank you for watching is a little overkill. So I will do the YouTube algorithm plugs. So as always, we thank you all for watching. If you do appreciate our content, like, subscribe, hit the notifications button, all that stuff. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you have some tips against Nighthaunt that we didn't cover here, or you disagree with something we said, feel free to drop into the comments and start a discussion there. Love to hear back from you guys. All right, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.